Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank you all for coming to our second annual manufacturing forum. Plan to do this on an ongoing basis. My name is Aaron Swig. I'm the managing partner here. If you don't know me, I did want to share with you a couple of different other learning opportunities we have coming up. One's actually tomorrow. We have a year-end tax update that Ruben and Bob will be presenting on tomorrow, 10 a.m. It's a webinar, so don't even have to get out of your jammies to get there and see it. And then on the 26th of January on Thursday, we also have a cybersecurity webinar. That's a joint presentation we're doing with Highland Insurance and DMC Technology Group. So very informative there, and obviously a pretty significant topic. And then Jessica, you said we have some QR codes available. There we go. So if you want to, if you're interested in either of those, please feel free to grab one of those on the way out and scan it. With that said, want to first of all thank Julie for organizing the event today and last year's and keeping it moving forward. Julie leads our manufacturing segment. Is just doing a wonderful job there, and she's going to take it away for us here.
Thanks. I'm not sure I agreed to do this annually, but anyways.
Too late now.
Minutes of that one. So again, to echo Aaron's comments, we appreciate everyone taking the time to come out today. Just a couple items before we start. If anybody needs the restroom out the store, down the hall to the left, please feel free to help yourself to food and drinks. We have more appetizers and adult beverages coming later. And with that, I think we can go ahead and get started. Our first presenters are Kevin Wickenheiser, am I saying that right? From NISIS Solutions, and also Tim Stansfield from IET.
Well, good afternoon, welcome. I'm Tim Stansfield. Kevin's the good looking guy. And those are the companies we represent. I'm going to go through a little bit about IET. Kevin is going to go through a little bit about NISIS, and then we're going to go through a little bit of a case study, and we'll keep it pretty informal. Feel free to stop me at any time with any questions, as well as with Kevin.
Skip one.
Sorry. Kevin and I are both from the area. I grew up in Toledo. My son will laugh at me. I always do a shout out, Rogers 77. Kevin grew up just across the border there. Both of us went to the University of Toledo, College of Engineering, and we went there, easily see that we went there at different times. But we met about 15 years ago, and that has been a very important relationship for us both. I'll get this right. I can tell you the first time I met Kevin was about 14, 15 years ago. I remember the date, it was April 9th. And I walked in and I knew I was going to meet the general manager. He was a big wig with Magna, and I knew I was going to get a chance to meet him, and I was calling on him for business. And I walked into his office and I couldn't believe, first time I'm meeting this guy, and he's got happy birthday signs for me because April 9th is my birthday, which I thought was really, really cool. There were balloons in there. They had a cake that was coming in. Then I found out it was Kevin's birthday. So we both are born on April 9th, in about 20 years apart. We were both born on April 9th. The party was not for me. NISIS is a provider of manufacturing execution software and automation. And he's going to be telling you a little bit more about that, as well as sharing within our case study. And IET, which I'll kind of run through here real quickly. Well, I won't make it a commercial. We're right on Glendale. We've been here, we've been in business about 34 years. We have 60 full-time industrial engineers. That's what we do. We do industrial engineering in manufacturing, as well as service organizations. And we've worked, you name it in manufacturing, it's probably been in there. I'm going to show you some of our client list here in a second, but about 4,500 assignments in 800 different organizations. And that could be even a little bit, those could be dated numbers. But we've been doing this for a long time, as I mentioned, mostly in manufacturing. We started in automotive. Ford, GM, Chrysler, Honda, Toyota have all been customers of ours. GM was our big one about 31 years ago. We broke into GM Toledo. We've since been in about 28 of their plants. We've also, automotive represents now about 50-60% of our business. And the other 40 to 50% is anything you can imagine. A lot of food manufacturing. We are involved with making Snickers, all kinds of ice cream, cheese. And we're doing a lot in the military side, aerospace and military. Might be rocket engines. We're doing work in plants that make the electrical panels for nuclear submarines, all kinds of unbelievable stuff. Automotive still tends to be our bread and butter, but it is a pretty wide range. Kevin? Go
Thanks,
ahead.
Tim. With any introduction of NICES, we like to share the core values of NICES solutions. They're to be passionate, united, and thankful. And these are what we use to guide the company as we continue to grow. We've been in business for about 10 years now. You can see an example of our customer base here. Like IET, we are heavy in the automotive sector. That's about 70% of our business. And then the other 30 is made up of all different things, just like IET. So aerospace, consumer products, medical, anyone who's doing manufacturing, we feel like we can be of benefit to them. Because of our core values and the nature of the products and services we provide, most of these customers are very long-term customers. So when we get a customer, we have a long-term relationship with them. The business has two divisions. The first one is manufacturing execution software. So we have a couple of different versions and products geared towards assembly processes, repetitive processes like injection molding, stamping, or machining. And then there's some other products that can be bolted onto those. So things like warehouse management, defect collection, and downtime, really anything that needs to be done inside the plant from a software standpoint. That's something that we can assist with. We integrate to your existing ERP and MRP systems. And we really pride ourselves in the implementation process. So our team is made up of people who have spent time in manufacturing facilities, and that makes all the difference in the world when they try to implement software for our customers. The other side of our business is automation, and we have a pretty wide range of offerings here. Robotic integration, AGVs, electrical testing equipment, pick-to-light systems, vision inspection and image capture, and we build all types of custom machines and automation as well. So we're a little bit unique in the fact that we have the two sides of our business, both software and automation. And that really grew out of customer asks. People would ask us, can you take on more of these projects? Can we deal with one supplier instead of two or three? And that's really how NICES has grown to where it is today. A couple industry trends that we see pretty much daily now. Any plant we go into, they're either talking about one or all of these topics. One is a labor shortage. I can't tell you how many plant managers have told me we don't have enough people to run the plant. The business case for automation has completely changed. It used to be, how much money can I save with this automation? And now it's, how much can we actually continue to produce because I don't have enough people to meet the sales requirements like that. So that conversation has changed dramatically, but a lot of it's driven by just a lack of labor. Supply chain, we saw it through COVID. We continue to see shortages in a lot of different areas, and it's causing some of our customers to rethink their supply base. So onshoring is becoming more of a trend. And with that, there's a need for, again, additional labor and additional automation and technical resources. The shift to automation, again, driven by labor shortages, efficiencies, quality improvements. We're seeing a lot of companies who want to automate their processes for any of those reasons. And then quality and efficiency remain paramount. So the core of what we do is try to assist our customers with improving their quality and efficiency. And those still are the driving factors in a lot of the conversations we have with our customer base.
Well, I told you I'd tell you a little bit more about what IET does for a living. We work with manufacturing distribution service organizations to improve their productivity. And like I said, it was all manufacturing, but Right now, Frito-Lay is a big customer of ours, and they have to deliver product to 100,000 locations every single day from about 300 different distribution centers. And you want to talk about complex, and some of this could be anything from a few bags of Doritos to a wide range of products. And it can be a 7-Eleven and it can be a Walmart. So there's a lot of complexity there. But the majority of our work still remains within automotive. And our objective is always to improve their performance, improve their productivity. Productivity is a simple measure, output over input. So we can help them make more of the output or use less of the input. And the inputs, of course, are labor, they are materials, they are lost, user lost equipment, working capital methods, and then, of course, anything that could fall into overhead. And that's our role in life when we walk into a customer. I'm going to describe a case study that'll be a little more specific, and it's with Bad Boy Mowers. And I'm curious, how many people in here have heard of Bad Boy Mowers? So I can look around and see all the people that have very large yards. Typically, these mowers are used in yards that are an acre or more. They're very heavy duty, but they're extremely popular for that area of their customers. And they have a huge plant in Tennessee. And this plant has been making about 65,000 of these mowers or a variation of that mower in a year. And you can imagine there is some seasonality, but they make them year round. And these things are sold all over the country. So they are used in many cases year round. They have a great challenge. And their challenge is they need to double their capability. They need to double their capacity. And they felt their plant was at capacity at 65,000. They need to make 130,000 within which is now 4 years. Back then it was 5 years. They have labor challenges. They have all of the labor challenges that Kevin just talked about. They also have a lot of complexity. If you look at that mower, it'd be nice if they made 130,000 of those exactly, but they're not. There's a lot of variation to them. And it's extremely high value. And let me just tell you a little bit about the plant. They do all of the fabrication for all of the metal parts. They do all of the welding for all of those metal parts. They paint all of those welded metal parts. They deliver all of those parts to the appropriate area of assembly. And in addition, there's a lot of purchase components, the seats, the wheels, the drivetrain components. There's a lot of purchase components, again, that have variation unit to unit, and they have to be delivered to the appropriate assembly location. Challenge is they're running 1 to 2 shifts based on what time of year they're running. They're having labor challenges, as I just mentioned, and they can't imagine making 66,000, this is a year ago, let alone 65,000. So we were brought in, and I sat down with the CEO of this organization, and we put together a plan on let's assess what we have the capability to do. We're going to measure it for you. We're going to identify where the opportunity is. We're going to redesign this manufacturing plant, including fabrication, including welding, including the paint line, including the assembly. And then we're going to look at what is an appropriate level and use of automation, which was quite significant in this assignment. So we had to look at efficient labor. What are people doing? What can we design out? There wasn't a case where anybody was being lazy or anything like that. People were hustling. The question is, how much time were they spending doing value-added activity? Equipment utilization really centered around the paint line. Paint line was running 2 to 3 shifts, often on the weekend, with no apparent opportunity to flex this to get twice as much. So we had to figure that one out. And they had material loss. And that was so you get this very complex unit at the end of the line. When it goes to the customer, if there's an issue, it's an expensive return, very expensive. So it's got to be perfect. Heavy level of inspection, and that brought about its own challenges, which Kevin brought a great solution to. So we went and studied all these areas. So that's what our engineers do. They go out, we do what's called work measurement of some sort. We did some time studies, probably heard that term. We did some work sampling, all kinds of things in all of the 4 production areas. And we found out a lot of things. This is just a sample, but you can see that the activity of this was an assembly of the various stations really was an interesting variation of what people were doing and what was value added and what was non-value added. There was never a case where we said, you know what, they just weren't hustling. That was never an opportunity. As a matter of fact, and I'm going to say it again later, I've been in myself personally about 1,500 manufacturing plants. This includes UAW plants. This is not a union plant, but it includes all kinds of operations. And I can tell you that your direct labor, your people, will outperform the design of your production system. They will outperform it. Now, there might be a lot of wasted time, but it's in there by design. And that was our objective, was to go in there and identify what could we redesign? What could we take out of there? What could we eliminate in terms of non-value added or even improve some of the value added? Again, another sample, they were running on about a 5-minute tack time. They had a variety of assembly lines, but the main line was running on about a 5-minute tack time. The blue is the value added. The orange is the non-value added. They'll never do better than 5 minutes, 5.05 minutes. They'll never do any better than that because that is your constraint on a sequential assembly line. So we had to look at this and say, what can we do to redesign this? Hopefully not adding an army of people. That would not be necessarily out of the question because they had to get there, but it kind of became out of the question because they'd never get the people. So we had to, what could we redesign out of there? So we looked at the non-value added. We wanted to drive that tack time for the main assembly down to about 3 minutes. And then based on a 2-shift operation, as well as supplemented with other assembly lines, we would be able to achieve the 130,000. We had a number of these reports. The way that we worked is we had 3 different engineers working on various parts of the plant, working directly with their team. Now, their team has to make 65,000 of these right now while we are doing this redesign. So we did a lot of the heavy lifting during this redesign, but we worked right with their team. And we did a redesign of the entire areas. And let me jump ahead. We're going to get there. We are going to get to 130,000. You're going to see some pretty cool solutions from Kevin. But a lot of it came down to rebalancing, eliminating walking, figuring out where the delays are occurring. How do we ensure that we have the right amount of storage in between operations? Not zero storage, but not a mountain of storage, the right amount of storage, because we don't have a space for unlimited. We also then took a look at the final inspection report, and there was a lot of analysis there. And what the bottom line was, it basically is impossible for a system of human inspection to capture everything. So we had issues there. One, we could capture a lot and we could fix that, but a lot of it had to be fixed in the field, which again is very, very expensive when you're looking at a national distribution. We put together standard work. We put together balanced operations in terms of operational time, but also in terms of equity. So one of the challenges, especially in a sequential assembly line, is the work might be the same in terms of duration, but the complexity or the effort required to perform that work can be very different. So we tried to balance that as well. And we also instilled a plan for job rotation, which is kind of a necessary thing when you have a long sequential activity. And then we try to put as much visual control in place as possible. So we wanted to reduce our run sizes in fabrication, but welding is a critical operation with a it's not a lot of automation. It's manual welding. And if anybody has welding operations in your plants, you know it's a resource that has been a constraint well before COVID. So it was very important. And one thing about welding, the welders, men and women that are doing this operation, they want to weld. So If you keep them loaded with work, they're thrilled. They want to keep welding. What we found is they were spending about 25% of their time welding, 75% of their time securing parts, figuring out what to do, whatever that interference was. We were able to take that 25%. We drove it to about 60%, which sounds low, but it was more than double in terms of performance. We had a happy welding operation. We also, and to make sure of that, we established inventory levels very clearly identified at each welding station so that they were always a minimum of 2 hours ahead in terms of their material requirements. We did the same thing in the paint line. Can't miss a hook. And you have to be able to paint what needs to be painted in as best you can appropriate sequence. So again, we built an appropriate visual control system there. And really bottom line is simplification. I've been in a lot of plants. If I walk through a plant, I consider myself an expert. If I walk through a plant, don't understand it, it's not working. I should be able to see it and I should be able to understand it, just in general terms. Understand the flow, understand where their constraint is, understand whether an issue is happening. And that's what we drove for within Bad Boy. And I think we got there. At that point, we were ready to look at and do detailed design on automation. Kevin, I'll let you step.
Tim was very accurate in his description of what IET was doing there. They were really laying the groundwork to be able to automate and add technology to the process. Initially, Bad Boy was not really even in a position to add any automation or technology because their processes weren't in control. So as IET was working to get their processes under control, we started to get involved to say, how can we add technology to this process to make it better? So Tim touched on a little of this, but initially there was a lot of tribal knowledge. They were assembling mowers with tools that they brought from home that they would, so they didn't even get supplied tools from the company. There was no standardization. Obviously, everybody brings their own tools. Everybody puts the mower together a different way. There was not a whole lot of ways to measure efficiency. They basically looked at how many did I make today? That was about the only measurement they had. They had a physically challenging process. So this is not a small mower. They were moving these by hand on carts when we got involved initially. So there's non-value added work there, but there's also a physical strain that's put on people moving something that heavy around by hand all day. And they had a significant cost of quality, like Tim talked about. They had an excessively high number of rejects in the field, right? And again, it was usually being found by the guy in his lawn who had a problem with the mower. And you can imagine how happy he is. He's got to take it back to the dealer. The dealer has to call the factory. It's not a good situation. So some of the things that we brought to the table, automated work instructions. So step-by-step instructions based on a specific model of mower. Because of our experience in other industries and being able to simplify these things, we were able to put an exact work instruction step-by-step on the computer in front of every operator for every specific mower. Error proofing. So again, stopping some of these defects from occurring throughout the process. So we used our MES system to tie into the torque tools. So we knew that they drove the bolt and it was to the right torque. We use pick lights to make sure they're picking the right components as the mowers are coming down the line. Real-time production monitoring and feedback. So giving them a second-by-second count on how they're doing, giving that feedback to everybody in the operation so they could see minute by minute, how are we performing to our target today? Automated assembly line. You'll see a little video of that here. You can see kind of how we took a lot of different technologies and took them all together into what we made for the final assembly line, and then improved quality performance based on what we did on the assembly line, but then also based on a final inspection cell that you'll see as well, that inspected about 130 different specific things on every mower that came off the line. So this is a picture of the assembly line. You can see here we've got a feedback board that's telling them how they're doing every hour of the day towards their target. You'll see this is an automated AGV line. So we're telling them which cart is the holdup right now. So if you're the guy who's red, you don't want to be that guy, right? There's a lot of pressure there. So this is giving them some real-time feedback. We have automated work instructions at every station. We provided the build fixtures and the AGVs to power the assembly line as well. And all the lift assists to lift the mower off at the end of the process, to lift up the engines. Really set up this entire thing at our facility here in Maumee, and then ran it off and shipped it down to Bad Boy. And I get this to work. But I need the mouse. So this is a quick video. So what you'll see is this is one of two identical assembly lines. You don't see the mirrored side, but there's a whole second line exactly like this. So instead of moving them by hand, they're all on AGV carts now. You can see how organized and well-timed everything looks right now, right? So using IET's data for line balancing, they were able to spread the work across each station and have a 3-minute tack time every single time. Yeah, you can see the carts are pulling up, they're doing their process. All of the torques, every single step is being recorded by the MES system as it happens. Like I said, there is an identical one of these just off screen, but this kind of gives a good example of what the finished product looked like. Okay, so from, hey, we build them with the tools we brought from home, to now we have a fully automated assembly. Okay. See if I can get to the next one. Tim touched on the quality issues that they were having. And they range from everything from, well, from, hey, I forgot to put a bolt in, to I put the wrong size deck on or the wrong seat option. So this cell, please don't mind the rock music, I think. But this cell was used for inspection at the end of the line. So every mower is put into the cell. You'll see the robots inspect about 130 different points on each mower and guarantee the quality and the correct options on every mower. Yeah, set up in Maumee, run off, and then ship down to Bad Boy. There's two industrial robots here with vision cameras, and you'll see they go through and they take pictures of all the different parts of the mower. The seats up and down and move the flaps so that they can get to everything on that mower. For example, they might put the right engine but the wrong sticker. They might have a California sticker on one that's going to some other state, all different issues that they were having. We're able to certify every mower as it came off the end of the line. We have a full history of this inspection, as well as the entire build process and the product birth certificate, that serial number. They can provide to their dealer and say, look, everything is completely certified. So major change for them from a quality perspective. This kind of shows this project is really a software and automation project. So we're using our MES system to drive the robot cell and also record all the data that's happening. So if there is a failure, we record that image. It can't skip out the door, and it has to be run back through the cell after it's been corrected. This just shows every one of those little lines there is a inspection. It successfully completed.
That was awesome. So if you ever get a chance to go to Kevin's shop right here in Maumee, who knows what he's going to have in construction. He's also got lots of sample robots and pick systems and things to take a look at. And it's a lot of smart guys and gals working on different things that are also happen to be very friendly. So I encourage you to make that visit and get to know NICES. You're welcome to come and see us on Glendale. Hopefully, when you get there, there'll be nobody there because they're all on assignment working. We do get paid by the hour, so we encourage 95% of our work is done on site. we really encourage that. That's where the most integration with their team can happen, and that's where the changes can be made. So I joke, but the reality is if you come into our office, I like it to be pretty empty, and it is right now, but you're welcome to stop in at any time. An easier option would be, please invite me anywhere. I say anywhere in the world, or as little as a 15-minute visit, I will meet you there. And I have done that. Now, a lot of CEOs will turn me over to a plant manager, say in Belgium, and they'll say, all right, you called me, I'm calling you out. You got a half an hour. I'll get more than that from them because we'll be able to talk about manufacturing and their challenges. But I would encourage you to feel free to use IET from that perspective. I know Kevin gets on airplanes as well, so we'd be happy to do that. Bottom line, I got two slides here I want to end with. Everybody's got standards of performance within your plant, within your operation. And you're probably performing against those standards somewhere between 80 and 90%. The reality is we go in and measure them everywhere. I don't this is not pointing a finger, but and by the way, standards are used for a lot of different things. They're used for measuring performance, but they're also used for financial systems. So they have to be developed in this manner. The reality is, though, we're very good and effective at coming in and say, what is your true standard? You're lucky if it's 80% of your current standard. And the true productivity of your current operations is probably, at Bad Boy, it was about 45%. Sounds like a terrible number. The reality is it gave us a great opportunity. They were making great product, obviously, and they were in an opportunity of expansion because of their performance. But they needed to make change and they needed to capitalize on their productivity. They're about 45%. They're probably running about 75% today. True performance. It might even be a little bit higher than that. That's the real gap, and that's what you want to go after. And a lot of that, at least half of it, is non-capital improvement. The other half is probably going to be capital improvement. There's a big chunk there. And I just kind of wanted to end it with a couple of takeaways. So, we were, thank you for letting Kevin and I do our commercial. We appreciate that. And we appreciate William Vaughan letting us come in. They're our accountants too. So we like these guys. They're professional. They're on top of it, and they've done a great service for IET and NISIS. But a couple of lessons. Labor will outperform the production design. So if you go out there and you see people standing around, it's by design. It's not because they're lazy. You've got to put the work in front of them. One of the things I can tell you is on the direct and the indirect labor side, if you can design the work to keep people productive, they're going to be happy. If you can design the work so that they know what is expected of them, they're going to be happy. If you can design the work with the tools they need, they're going to be happy. And I can also tell you this, again, we've been in a lot of plants. I'm actually collecting data and I'm trying to see if there's a research paper there. But what we're finding is those plants that have good design are having less of an attendance issue. Now, they're still having attendance issues. And there's other ways to address that with shift schedules and things like that. But the work design is very important. And it's not about the money, especially today. Today, it's about time that I'm productive, and I sure don't want to work Saturday and Sunday. And if I can set it up so that I'm working 4 days a week, that's even better. And we're seeing a lot of traction there where we're setting up 410s times 2 maybe. And then we're using either the Friday or the Monday as your overtime. Much bigger discussion, but money is not a personal motivator. The goal of productivity improvement is productivity improvement. There's a lot of, when we talk the language, we use the tools of Six Sigma, of Lean, of those types of programs. But one thing I can tell you, if your objective of improvement is to have a certain number of Kaizen events, and if you hit that, that's what you want to do. And it's a good measure, but it's not productivity improvement. It's not going to guarantee that. Look at your output, look at your inputs. And I'll measure it with our tagline, measure it, do everything you can to simplify it. When you walk through your plant, you should be able to understand it. You should be able to identify where the issues are. There'll be issues, but there should be a process of resolution of those issues. standardize as much as you can, both on the direct and the indirect side. And then use automation. And as Kevin mentioned, it's so important now. It's not driven simply by a return against labor. It's driven by a capability to do what you tell your customer you're going to do. And I've been working with Kevin for a long time, and it's been a real pleasure because the solutions they're going to work and they're reasonably priced. And that's a big, big deal. As Kevin mentioned, all of his guys and gals come out of manufacturing. Same with us. All of our guys and gals are spending their time in manufacturing. They'll never know the operations as well as you. They'll know the performance of those operations better than you very quickly, because that's what we're targeting to do. Anything you want to add, Kevin?
I just say thank you to William and Vaughan as well, and also to everybody today for listening to Tim and I. Hopefully it was helpful, and if there's anything either of us can do to assist your organization, please let us know.
Any questions? Yes, sir.
What was driving the increase? Probably demand, but from 65,000 units to 130.
Yeah, they had grown significantly to get to 65,000 over the past few years, and that was their target. They knew that they could grow that if they could make them, they could sell 130. It was simply sales and marketing and historical performance, which, by the way, I can't help them with. I can't sell more. They're doing all the selling. We're going to help them get to that number, but it's proven that they're on their way to do that.
Their exact quote was, "We're really good marketers and okay manufacturers." So they needed to be really good manufacturers and really good marketers. And if you're familiar with Bad Boy at all, they sponsor basketball tournaments and rodeos and theme parks, and they have country music stars that are their spokespeople. They are very, very good marketers.
They're in the, what's that? What's that store, the big store that they're in?
Tractor Supply.
Tractor Supply.
Yeah.
So again, I didn't know much about them. Now I see them all the time, Tractor Supply Company. But I'll see advertisement for them. It's interesting. They're advertising for their company. There's always a Bad Boy mower in their commercial, which no one would notice, but I noticed that. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
When you start with a client like that, you obviously go from a visit to a big price tag at the end. Do you normally start with a engineering purchase order to get something done, some basic study, and then do it incremental? Or do you go from a small study to the whole large project and with possible additions?
That's a great question. Thank you. That's a great question. So I'm going to give you two answers. If it is a customer that we have been working for 20 years, they're very comfortable writing a big purchase order. Typically, though, even with long-standing customers, in something like this where there's a lot of, we're not sure that we're even going to be able to pull this off. Do we need to add a second plant? Is that going to be our answer? They'll rely on us to put together a scope of work that is, from a cost standpoint, manageable. So in this particular case, it still ended up being a pretty nice piece of work for us, but it was definitely very manageable. It's about an 8-week assignment for 2 guys. Now, the purchase order came in. He said, "That's great, but we're going to keep it," because I knew the CEO. He said, "We're going to keep you afterwards, and I don't want to keep doing the paperwork." But that was the, and we measured that every week. We said, let's just look at the progress every week, make sure that we're getting team buy-in, that we're getting realistic solutions, and we're going to get to where we need to get. So we did weekly reviews, and I always tell our customers, you can fire us anytime. If we're halfway through, fire us. Not a problem. We don't get fired. So it's an easy thing for me to say, but we do. So we got to give them something that's manageable. That'll give us an opportunity to prove out the assignment, prove out our capabilities, and then they can decide if they're going to keep us on. They kept 3 of our guys on for over a year, helping with the implementation, a lot of what Kevin was doing. That wasn't part of the original assignment. They just said, "Hey, you guys are working well." And we're pretty cost effective too. Again, I'm talking selfishly here. We're engineers, we're not consultants. So there's a price tag associated with engineers, there's a price tag associated with consultants. So we're reasonably priced. We're to the point now, because of the engineering shortage, it's a no-brainer because they cannot find people, at what they're paying us. So usually we'll give some sort of a piece they rely on, and the other thing I do too, I'll come in and write a scope, and I tell every customer or potential customer, when I hand you that scope, it's yours. So if you want to take our name off of it, send it out for competitive bidding. And the reason I do that is, one, I feel pretty confident we're going to get it, but that's not the main reason. The main reason is they took time to let me come into their plant and put this together. I'll try to give them some value. So now you can take that scope and you can use it for whatever you want. Now that's IET's philosophy. Most companies won't do that, but we will. And it's not unusual for a new customer to say, hey, can I competitive bid that? Or purchasing said, I have to competitive bid it. No problem. Here's the Word document. I say a PDF, here's the word, change it. It's yours. Does that answer your question? All right, let's move on. Julie, let's move on.
Thanks, guys. So our next speaker is going to talk about a topic that is very relevant today. If you haven't heard anything about it, I guarantee in the next few years, you will be hearing more about it. And that would be ESG, environmental, social, and governance. Andrew is the president and founder of Blue CSR. So I welcome him to your note.
Bring my computer, I can't read. So, thank you, Julia. And Andrew Watterson. So how many of you have heard of ESG? All right, we've got a few handfuls, hands up. Environmental social governance, it's a new terminology, kind of comes out of a few others that my conversation with you today is going to walk a little bit through both who I am, what my company is, very briefly, and then some definitions around what ESG is and the related topics, where this sort of came from or why is it sort of emerging now as a hot topic, and then give you some ideas just around where to get started if your company is interested in getting into the space. So let's see if this works. So about us, I started this business about 2 years ago, but I've been in the work of corporate responsibility, sustainability for over 20 years. I was the first chief of sustainability for the city of Cleveland. Was working with a large consultancy firm for a little while, and then worked with KeyBank. I was the head of sustainability and corporate responsibility for them, and then most recently Gojo Industries, which are the makers of Purell. So we got a little busy. So I started this business in part because my role at Gojo was very expansive, and I wasn't able to focus on what I'm passionate about. And the family owners of Gojo are wonderful people and were my first client. So I started my own business, utilizing them as one of my first clients, and then used my network to expand on that. So we work with clients on understanding what matters most to them in their industry, helping to develop their programs to support those material topics, and then report and disclose on those topics, partnering usually with a communications firm to talk about that. So first of all, definitions. So I mentioned we're going to talk a little bit about like what these are. These are all, looks like formatting got a little screwed up on the PowerPoint, so apologies for that. But sustainability, environmental social governance, corporate social responsibility, diversity, equity, inclusion, all of these things are, they're different in many ways, but they're all addressing environmental and social impacts of your organization and the impacts that you have in your supply chain or your value chain as we talk about it in the field. You don't have to be a company that is sustainable or driving positive social change to be a responsible and sustainable organization. And the converse can also be true. You can be an organization that's driving a solar manufacturer or driving positive social change out in the world, but not actually operating your own business responsibly or in a sustainable manner. And so what's important is sort of understanding that these things can live together, but but they're also intricately, you don't have to be a company that's like, we're a solar panel manufacturer. But to be able to work in this field. Environmental social governance is the responsible management principally of your environmental and social impacts across your entire value chain. So not just your operations or how you conduct your business with your employees and your immediate customers, but how you interact with your supply chain, your broader stakeholder groups that you interact with that essentially give you the right to conduct business. And any one of these factors can create an issue for you to be successful over the long term. The environmental pillar are clearly you're managing your environmental impacts within your operations and with your supply chain. These are things like energy and emissions, water, waste, but not just your own operations. It extends to your supply chain, to the use of your products and the end of the use of your products. That's how the definitions of these have been expanded over time. The social pillar is really thinking through, again, their social impacts across your entire value chain, thinking about things like safety, human rights, diversity, equity, inclusion, data privacy and security, things of the like. And then governance are the controls and processes that you have in place to govern your business, but also govern your environmental and social topics. So the governance pillar has really been, particularly for publicly traded companies, has been a pillar that's been really important for them. It's the extension of not just managing your financial performance through strong governance, but also having strong governance around your environmental and social impacts. An older term is sustainability. And traditionally, sustainability is more a positive mindset that there's the concept that by responsibly managing your environmental, social, and economic, so instead of governance, it utilizes economic, that you can be successful across these three pillars. We talk about 3 pillars of sustainability, and it makes the assumption that you already have the governance, or you're putting the proper governance and controls in place to manage these impacts, the environmental, social, and economic impacts. The failing historically that sustainability really has, so that terminology of sustainability, as I would argue, it's never been able to get out of the environmental sustainability mindset. So, diversity leaders or HR leaders within organizations never really saw sustainability as a parallel to what the work that they're doing within human resources. Corporate social responsibility, another definition that we utilize in this space, came into terms, or corporate responsibility was a terminology that large corporations like to take on of we're being responsible, we're a good corporate citizen, and we're making sure that we're managing our impacts. And principally what the difference between corporate responsibility and sustainability is that they recognize that you're not going to be all things to all people, and that you do have negative impacts, but it really puts a focus on transparency and disclosure and understanding and acknowledging the environmental, social, and impacts that you have out in the community. And then the other shift is looking at shareholder or stakeholder value. So thinking about all these ideas of driving value within the organization, driving value within your customers, and within the broader stakeholders that you impact. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, which has lived as long as sustainability or some of these other terms, but has really been in many ways kind of living within the human resources space, is now sort of seen to be much more inclusive and comprehensive across the entire kind of ecosystem of an organization. And it's looking at things from diversity as sort of the quantitative representation of your organization and your impacts. Equity is providing equal access and resources and opportunities to individuals. But equity is probably the hardest one to actually drive because it's a recognition of historical institutional inequities. So equity doesn't mean that you treat everyone equal. Equity means that you provide everyone the equal opportunity to be successful, which might mean that you're giving more resources to individuals within your organization than others because they may be disadvantaged. And equity DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, is largely the most popular term within diversity now. But equity is probably the hardest one to drive from thinking from a financial perspective. And then inclusion is the most important one in my own perspective, is that inclusion is creating that environment and practicing behaviors where individuals feel that they're welcomed and understood. And inclusion requires that you are making sure that your environment is psychologically and physically safe and trusted. So you can't be a manager and create an inclusive environment if the people that you're leading don't trust you or don't feel safe coming to work. So diversity, equity, and inclusion, and ESG are sort of the most prominent terminologies being utilized today within the corporate sector and predominantly like publicly traded companies. But I want to help try to shape where this came from, and then also articulate some ways or why this is becoming important for non-publicly traded companies and companies that are working with publicly traded companies. So any questions before I go on? All right, so the background about this is that it didn't just come out of nowhere. So this has really been a long road for about 30 years. And it's really coming out of, though we have regulations in the United States and regulations in other countries that drive labor and environmental impacts, there's no way within a global economy to manage how you're doing this across borders. And so there were efforts in the 90s, in particular around addressing climate change and human rights, where there were international movements with companies and with non-governmental organizations to sort of set standards on how to drive some of these changes. In 1997 and 1998, there were some new tackling the built environment, created things through the US Green Building Council called LEED, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. And then GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, started in 1997, that were helping to sort of shape or drive some of these, bringing focus onto tackling some of these issues. And probably more important for GRI, they're really trying to increase transparency and disclosure of large multinational corporations. In the early 2000s, the United Nations developed the UN Global Compact, which was something that companies and organizations and cities could sign on to, that demonstrated they're making a commitment across environmental and social impacts. There are several different iterations of that. Much later on in 2015, the United Nations created the UN Sustainable Development Goals. GRI created their GRS standards, which was a revision of the GRI protocol of 1997. And this was all sort of demonstrating a slow movement or slow momentum gaining around voluntary disclosures and voluntary commitments around environmental and social impacts. But then things started to change, most like in the United States and principally with large investors. In 2010, led by Mayor Bloomberg at the time and led by using Bloomberg as an organization, Mayor Bloomberg founded the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board. The Sustainable Accounting Standards Board was looking to be a parallel to the financial FASB, Financial Accounting Standards Board, of targeting publicly traded companies and having them include a set of material topics across sustainability topics, but thinking about environmental and social issues that they have to disclose in their financial statements. That was their aim, that was their target. And it's a much narrower set than what GRI had sort of set up as a framework. GRI sort of looks at a broad set of stakeholders and a broad set of impacts, more focused on your reputation. And SASB was more focused on what are those environmental and social impacts that could have a material impact on your financial performance. So something that you should be putting into your 10K. And so they developed those standards, have really, with a lot of force, moved a lot of these movements forward with getting large publicly traded companies to take this seriously. The two other kind of large issues that really drove publicly traded companies was Larry Fink, the president of CEO of BlackRock, one of the world's largest investor organizations, telling their companies that they invest in that they have to start dealing with climate change, dealing with diversity and inclusion, and really sort of saying, if you want us as an investor, you need to show us that you're doing progress on this. And then ISS, or the Institutional Shareholder Services, something that probably many people in here have never heard of, but they were a highly respected organization for institutional investors that had a governance rating score. And in 2018, they decided to create an environmental and social score that went parallel to their governance score. And this is something that, every investor relations person at a publicly traded company wants to see what their ISS score is. And now all of a sudden they had these environmental and social risk scores, and they're like, what do we do about this? Those were some really significant things that were happening kind of between 2015 and 2020. And then COVID hit. So COVID actually kind of accelerated a lot of these efforts, or an awareness of things like environmental issues and social issues. It caused us all to kind of take a break and think about what matters most to all of us. But it had a material impact on kind of driving some of this change within the companies. Now, most recently in 2022, the Security Exchange Commission now has created new protocols and new rules that are going to require publicly traded companies to disclose their greenhouse gas emissions. In the draft rules, it's including what's called Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. That probably doesn't mean anything to people, but basically Scope 3 is the wild card. That's the emissions of your entire supply chain and the entire use of your products. And so that's a big one. It probably won't get into the ruling, but I would argue it really doesn't matter because of what we'll be talking about in a few minutes. So I'm going to just run through these, but this is sort of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which I kind of highlighted, that came out in 2015. What's really nice about these, they're very weak in many ways. Like, they're very non-committal. They're just sort of, companies can sign on and say, hey, we support some of these goals. But what's really nice about them is it's a big tent concept, and that you don't have to tackle all these. If you wanted to sponsor, or really say, us as KeyBank, for instance, we really sponsored 8 decent work and economic growth. We're a bank. That seems like something we should care about. We said we really want to help to support driving that type of change. And we picked a couple others that we thought we could have an impact, but we're a bank. We can't do all of this. So we're like, no, we're not going to do it all. And I touched on these, but I just want to reiterate that these really did drive a significant change, particularly with publicly traded companies. And in many ways, that's trickling down, I would say, to private organizations and communities. But some of the others are more traditional that you'd think of. Consumers and employees are really driving a lot of this change. So consumers want to buy products from companies that share their values. And employees want to work for companies that share their values, or that earlier that money is not as big of a driver as some other attributes of employment. And a couple examples of those is that Amazon employees walked out of a shareholder meeting and then pushed a shareholder resolution to drive significant climate disclosures. And on the social side with consumers, there was a big backlash with Chick-fil-A and Hobby Lobby on their positions on the LGBT community. And, it really caused some issues to these organizations, some of them made changes. Some of them said, we don't really care. But those are kind of attributes that are continuing to drive some of that change. And the other is this sort of broader concept that companies are no longer simply looking at, what do the shareholders want? And they're thinking more broadly around what do stakeholders want? Because oftentimes it's not necessarily, what's straight in front of you that's going to be what's going to derail you. It's something that you didn't think about and didn't see from the side. So taking a broader perspective of what are the stakeholders that are going to potentially drive us to make a different choice is a different mindset that a lot of organizations are beginning to take. So this is sort of it's expanded in the need for different frameworks and different uses, as well as setting new goals and incorporating different components into driving business performance. And a recognition that, you know, non-financial performance can be an indicator of future financial performance. So this is evolved in sort of a proliferation of a lot of organizations that are working in this space. I'm just going to talk about a few of these. So CDP used to be the Climate Disclosure Project, and now it looks at a broader set of disclosures around climate, water use, and forest. And they invite companies to participate. And I put the quotes of invite companies to participate. Their focus is it's publicly traded companies and cities. And oftentimes, so some of my clients have been invited by CDP. Some of my clients have been invited by some of their customers that have said, we want you to submit your information into CDP. I mentioned SASB, the other in GRI. The other one I wanted to mention was the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. The framework that the SEC is including in their disclosures that they likely will require for publicly traded companies is aligned with the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which is an international framework for disclosing your climate-related financial impacts. So, and you have to go through a whole bunch of hoops to figure out what those are. But that's become sort of an international framework for identifying and disclosing what your climate change impacts are as an organization. And, you know, voila. So, but based on those sort of organizations, now you have all these, you know, data providers and ESG providers and end users that are utilizing these frameworks of disclosures. And then you have information producers, you know, your big four consultancies, and a whole bunch of other organizations that are engaged in this ecosystem, which is existing out there and thriving and kind of driving a lot of these additional changes. So more acutely, there's a few more recent activities I'm sure you're familiar with that have been driving a lot of this change. On the social issues, you know, you're focusing on the gender pay equity and the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, and LGBT rights, and kind of Asian American, Pacific Islanders discrimination, kind of you name it. Everything that's been out in the ecosystem has been driving changes within organizations on how they're thinking about what they're managing internally and what they're doing or what their impacts are on their products and services. And this has sort of resulted in some significant commitments. So these are just 3 examples. I can go on and on and on examples. But Walmart has made some significant commitments, as Target has, and General Motors. So General Motors wants to become the most inclusive company in the world. They're looking at how to attract and retain talent. Walmart sort of focus on their US associates and increasing diversity, and Target trying to increase their hiring of Black employees by 20%. These are sort of bold commitments that these companies have made, and they're driving a lot of change in how they're doing business, how they're training their employees, and how they're interacting with their customers. On the climate crisis, you know, I just read, and maybe people are familiar with this, but we're all familiar with the wildfires out west and hurricanes and you know, everything that's been happening. But I also learned, you know, that the Mississippi River is at historic lows. It's down over 50 feet in many parts of the river channel, and it's caused a 75% reduction in shipping traffic of barges and principally all the grain that we ship down the Mississippi So we have barges that are stacked up. Last year we heard about, all the ships that were sitting off of LA. Now we've got all these barges that are sitting in the Mississippi that can't go anywhere because the river's too low. That's a significant issue, economic issue, as well as environmental and social issue for our country and for people around the world if we can't get grain delivered by barge. But the recognition that climate change is a serious and serious issue for us to tackle has resulted in a lot of companies making some significant commitments. And why these commitments matter to all of you is what these commitments mean. So these are a few months old, but 380 companies have made commitments to 100% renewable energy through the RE100 initiative. About 80% of the S&P 500 report to CDP. About 1,800 companies have established science-based targets. So Science-Based Targets Initiative is a nonprofit organization that sort of certifies your targets, but a science-based target is essentially a net zero target, which means that you're not putting any more carbon into the environment than you're taking out. And what's interesting about a science-based target is it includes that scope 3 emissions, which is the emissions of everything from employee commuting to business travel to the materials that you are putting into your products, to the products, the life of your products, to the disposal of your products. And when 1,800 companies have made public commitments to establish these targets, it's now bleeding into their supply chain. So a lot of my clients have gotten calls from some of their customers asking them to also have science-based targets, or what are they doing about managing their carbon emissions, or what is the carbon emissions related to what we're buying from you? These have been typical questions that a lot of companies are getting now, which is interesting. I have my own opinions about some of these things that are good and bad. I think that particularly with some of these frameworks, I don't agree with frameworks that sort of force you to participate in one type of program or system, but I do believe that systems that are more based on frameworks and processes that can be managed or verified by a broad set of parties are ways that are more equitable for companies and organizations to engage in. But that's an aside. So some of the commitments on climate. So these are a few: Walmart, Amazon, and General Motors again. So Walmart has committed to achieve zero emissions across their global operations by 2040. 50% of their global operations by renewable energy by 2025, and 100% by 2035. Reduce, emissions from their supply chain, and manage to restore 1 million acres. Encourage Walmart suppliers to report progress on their nature goals. Walmart has it's called Project Gigaton, and they invite you to participate again, but you go into a portal and you talk about what your goals are. You start to sign up for some SMART goals, and then they help to figure out and calculate how much is that helping them achieve their goals. Similarly, Amazon has very similar goals around 100% renewable energy, reducing emissions, and achieve net zero, that terminology again, net zero by 2040. And then General Motors be carbon neutral in their global products and operations by 2040. So these are very consistent in how that terminology of net zero or science-based targets, that in turn means their entire supply chain and the use of their products out in the field. A couple others, Microsoft has a really bold goal. So they want to be net zero carbon positive by 2030. And they want to eliminate all the carbon that they produced since 1977 or whenever they were created by 2050, which is insane. And starting next year, they're requiring their suppliers, and then they start with the biggest first, but they're requiring their suppliers to disclose their greenhouse gas emissions so that they can start to get their head around like what this is going to mean to their operations. And that's kind of why I sort of said the SEC thing's nice, and it's good that they're kind of stepping into this realm and putting some regulations and probably some rigor around the calculations or the processes that we go about these calculations. But when these massive companies have made these commitments that are impacting global systems, it doesn't matter as much, because even if the SEC doesn't rule on that, or the Supreme Court comes in and says they can't do that without additional legislation, these companies don't seem to be backing away from some of these commitments. Some are, but it'll be interesting to see where it goes. So Vaughan is the founder of Patagonia, and I mean, Patagonia is like, super sustainable organization and quirky in so many ways. But his, 90% of a product's environmental impact is committed at the design stage. 2/3 of waste is generated by industry, not households. So what we do at work has a far greater consequence than going out on a Saturday morning to trade in your Hummer for a Prius. So, the idea here is that, what we do at work really matters, and the decisions that we make at work really matters. And the example that we have, that we lead really matters at work. And then this survey is usually done every couple of years, but in 2020, 90% of the executives surveyed considered sustainability and ESG either important or very important in driving enterprise value. So anyways, that's an idea around business case. So in thinking about kind of what to do on starting your ESG journey, it's pretty simple in many respects. If the formatting worked out, apologies for that. Generally, we start with what's called a materiality assessment, and that looks at thinking about identifying what matters most to your organization and to your industry, and then determining sort of what you're going to do about that. And help, what that does is sort of help you identify, what should we be focusing on and what shouldn't we really need to care about. It also helps to explain to your stakeholders or your customers maybe why you're not managing water. If water is not a significant input in your operations, then don't spend a ton of resources trying to, measure and manage your water consumption. But if it is a significant portion of it, then you really need to be focusing on that. Disclosure, and when I say disclosure, that if you're not talking about it, if you're not measuring it, if you're not reporting on it, and it doesn't necessarily mean external reporting. I've couple clients that are very anxious about public reporting and are focusing first on internal reporting and executive reporting to try to first figure out sort of, all right, what does it look like and what can we actually move the needle on? And then really based on those kind of elements and what you see through your disclosure, putting management structure in place to manage those attributes. And I put this last because over the last few years, there's been an explosion of ESG. PwC had said they're going to hire 100,000 people in ESG. E&Y said they're going to invest $1 billion. I mean, there's all these sort of, we're all going to do this ESG work. And that also has led to a lot of leaders like me getting very high paid jobs in very large companies, but probably not necessarily the right people in the right places, because it's kind of rushing in saying, we've got a sustainability person, or we got a DEI person, when really, if you didn't do that materiality assessment and figure out, well, maybe you didn't need a sustainability manager, maybe you needed someone in a DEI manager. But making sure that you have the resources, either internal or external resources, to effectively manage your ESG program. What a materiality assessment looks like is it looks like basically first starting off with tabletop study research and understanding some benchmarking. Generally, I look at not only your industry and peers, but also who are the principal stakeholders, or your CEO might have that one company that they admire. What are they doing? So trying to make sure that you're looking at who's going to influence the decisions that you make internally. Stakeholder engagement, which is essentially interviews and surveys to try to identify what they see matters most to you. And these might include customers and some suppliers or key partners. And then prioritizing those topics to identify assessment. We talked a lot about disclosures. These are all public disclosures through ESG or sustainability reports and regulatory disclosures. But I did want to hit on particularly on surveys, because CDP is a survey that, as I mentioned, a lot of companies are engaging on and asking others to participate in too. But there's another one that people may be more familiar here with, which is called EcoVadis. And EcoVadis is a different type of survey, but it's laser focused on your supply chain. So a lot of large companies have utilized EcoVadis to manage their the ESG performance measurement of their supply chain. And what's nice about EcoVadis is that it's not incredibly costly. So it's a pretty low entry to participate in it. You have a lot of resources that you need to do to respond to the survey, but it's not overburdensome on participating. It's also private. So when you submit, it's evidence-based and it's private. So you can't just say that you do something. Like if you have a human rights policy, you have to actually upload your human rights policy into the system, and then their analysts will validate that, yes, you have a human rights policy. But it's private in that you're only sharing that with EcoVadis to make a validation of your claim. It's not being shared with your business partners or publicly at all. So that from that standpoint, it's a really nice system. It's also industry specific, and it's scaled based on the size of your organization. So if you're a very small organization, they recognize that you don't have a lot of systems and controls in place that maybe a super large company might have in place. And then finally, the ESG management, which really is just looking at your policies, your processes and programs to make sure that you're effectively managing those material topics, and then identifying what topics you want to talk about internally and externally to effectively manage these issues. So with that, that's my kind of ESG 101 and by the fire hose, I guess, on sort of what this ecosystem looks like, and how some organizations are kind of getting into this space or really driving some significant change in these industries. So I'd open this up to discussion if you have any questions, but kind of thinking about this of, how does this apply to your company? Are there any local issues that are priorities that you've seen that are elevating? And also who in here has sort of a sustainability or ESG program in place, and if you have any, and just any questions?
I'm curious, how many people in the room have an ESG program at your company? How many people knew what ESG was up until a year ago, before a year ago?
Not necessarily by that term.
Yeah.
But, we have for a long time, I'm Dave Booth from All States Refractory Contractors. We have for a long time recognized, the need to have diversity within and kind of an even playing field through the hiring procedures. We deal in several hazardous environments. So, those things in terms of how we approach those, we've not gotten into the point where, we're beginning to move out to our supply chain. Being a small business, that's their business, as long as we're getting what we need when we need it, we're really not moving into that area. And that was one of my points with you. This is a huge task for a very small organization. I mean, when you start talking about somebody that is less than 25 employees, the essence behind this thing, you almost have to have somebody like yourself come in and say, okay, this is how you guys can do this, but it's an expense that I don't think most of us in this particular environment are going to say, yeah, okay, it's a nice dream, but we're going to, and I like the fact that you've picked selective items. The items that are important to you and your organization are the items that you really need to concentrate on. You know, this is a huge field. And truthfully, it's a moving target.
Yeah.
And so it becomes, from an upper management standpoint, it becomes a real time consumer if you're going to delve in and commit to this thing on a, yeah, we're going to do this wholeheartedly thing.
Yeah, you can't really, you
No.
can't do all of it. It's also my advice to any business leader is that whatever you do has to be authentic and consistent.
Right.
So if it's not part of what your company culture is, or it's not something that you can consistently apply in your business practices, then it's not going to be sustained. What I've been finding interesting is that even smaller companies have been, particularly through some customers, are beginning to get asked to participate in sort of like a climate commitment, for instance, or a supplier diversity program. I had one client that is an architecture firm, and a decent size. They have a couple hundred employees, so they're not tiny, but they're also not massive. And they only have two offices, and it's like they had a client that basically said, well, we have a net zero target. We want you to have one. And they didn't have one, and they didn't win a contract because of it. And it was interesting to sort of see that became part of a decision factor of actually getting the contract. And I have a couple other clients that it's become they have to get a certain score within EcoVadis in order for their contract to be renewed. And EcoVadis is really interesting because I've known about it for many years, but I'm in the space and many people haven't ever heard of it. But over the last 12 months, and particularly because some major companies have now adopted it, like Amazon has, as the tool to measure their supply chain. And so now all of a sudden these companies are getting asked to participate. Like I said before, at least there's a low cost of entry. It's at $1,500 to submit your survey. And it's it's based on continuous improvement. So it's sort of a whole process of getting started.
See, the problem we have with that is, and it's like what we've experienced over the years, gets into somewhat of this, where the safety and the environmental compliance and so on and so forth. And we work for big companies. I mean, people like Owens, Illinois, Johns Manville, Owens Corning, those kinds of things that are, large organizations with, thousands of employees. And we supply services to those groups. And several of them have now moved away from internal data collection for things like safety scores and environmental compliance. And so you've moved out to people like Invadis for your group. The issue for us is not the entry point, although in some cases it's fairly expensive.
Yeah.
It's the compliance issue that really begins to create the economic hardship. And, when you are in our case, in a bidding environment where, you've got to lay this cost off somewhere.
Right.
And so, we basically went to a point where we said, look, we have no problem dealing with this environment, or this situation. But in the years where you don't spend X amount of dollars with our organization, you are going to pay X amount of dollars for us to meet that compliance standard.
Right.
So you've got to look at this as a cost of operation and try to keep it under control, or at least make your customers aware of the fact that, look, you can't do this just because you're in that business. So these kinds of things, as they grow in importance or recognition, are actually huge costs to the smaller organizations. And you're going to have to figure how much you're going to comply, how you're going to deal with it, and how you're going to lay that cost off. Because it is an expensive operation.
Yeah, the benefit of those platforms is there's a cost of responding to an individual survey from a customer. and sometimes that costs, when you get those requests from a lot of customers, outweighs the cost of submitting, one survey that many people can use. But it's only a certain set. There's maybe 1,500 companies right now that pay EcoVadis to get the data from their suppliers. So it's your biggest companies in the world that are in that space. But I would encourage that it's an important consideration for those large OEMs to provide funding. One of my clients provides funding for smaller enterprises to participate in these programs because of the cost burden of it. Absolutely. Yes.
There's obviously a lot of money, chasing companies with good ESG score, whether it's BlackRock, private equity companies. But I mean, who's the overarching authority to audit these ESG scores? Because I was reading something over the weekend, FTX, the exchange that just went bankrupt. They're under criminal investigation, possibly losing depositors' funds. They're headquartered in the Bahamas, and they had a better governance score than ExxonMobil did. So,
Yeah, no,
Range, isn't it?
and by which rating and rankings.
that's the thing. I don't know. Who's
Yeah.
who
There,
would
that's
audit it?
that's part of the challenge, and that's part of the reason why you have regulators getting into the space. And right now the regulators they have rules now on greenhouse gas emissions. They also have a platform for rules on human capital, which would get to gender pay equity and diversity. So you're absolutely right. Like it's a pea soup of ratings and rankings. And a lot of them are completely opaque on their own methodology that they establish your ratings and rankings. The things I like about ISS is that, two is one, what they're evaluating on is rather transparent by industry, and they are by industry. And two, when I was working internally and even supporting some of my clients, and I know these are all publicly traded companies, but the other thing I like about ISS is that they when you do submit or make a change, like if you put a new policy in place and that was hurting one of your scores, they actually do update your score within a week or so. So it's not like Sustainalytics and a couple of these others, MSCI, it takes a whole year for you to get your score updated, or CDP, even though you might have just adopted like a new policy that could make you look better. But you're absolutely right. There is no police. And that's really where it gets back to, really just being strong and focusing on what's going to actually impact your business operations, what could drive business performance or drive better employee retention, and real metrics that will benefit your company, and then defend that if you get pushback from some of your customers or some external stakeholders.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? I know I'm in between a break, so. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're gonna take a quick break and we'll come back at like 3:20 for our last presentation. Please help yourself to some food over here.
You can take some home. Yeah. Pack it out.
Got more coming later. Yeah.
Oh, no, yeah. We'll call Stephen.
These don't.
I have. I don't think. They don't tell you.
This is my kid, but I have no idea what that is.
Oh, yeah. I wonder what it's kind of.
Yes. So you guys.
Recognize those?
Yeah.
So many years. Like Amy.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Sometimes I'm myself in the office.
Yeah.
No, there would be no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kids and. That being said.
Yeah.
Wouldn't get people in our-
That's right.
Some of our customers.
Out of West Michigan.
Yeah.
So we started off with a lot of.
Yeah.
Ended up doing sessions, really doing a lot of.
It was wild.
Yeah. Do the acquisition and. That's exactly what happened. We can get over here. I like the combination. Yeah.
Saw the paper files were in here. Yeah.
All the way up.
I'll keep you guys in mind. Because I just started.
I know, we've seen each other like 3 days.
And Sam, where stayed everything. So I took a little bit of time off, started with DWH, but the emphasis is really on this side of the M&A stuff, the growth, planning. We'll see what happens. I can imagine. I have a couple of things. So they had automation issues.
Can I invite myself?
And I think, we can do some of it. Slide out.
Sam, what's been going on?
For us and then for some of the higher relations. But, that's not. That's. Go in and. try and take out the man.
I still have non.
Yeah, real basics.
So many things going on.
So it was nice to meet you.
So we're just talking about.
No, we didn't. Went out. It's pretty cool. Isn't it?
That took about 6 months. A lot of that supply chain driven too, so. Robot manufacturers, so we select a robot that they have off the shelf, right? So they've got 50 models, and that one has the reach we need, and the payload we need. And then we'll design the cell and put that robot into it. And then we select the vision cameras that the robot has, and look at everything. Pretty neat, pretty neat. It's a cool project. They did, yeah. They actually made a video. Internal one. Right, yeah, yeah. We actually got a call from their competitor right after we did that project, because they were looking to do very similar. I think Borough or the other lawnmower guy. No, once the project's done, we let them know, but yeah, generally, we deal with a lot of competitors to each other. Yeah.
Everybody said it's.
Right.
So.
Thank you.
I know it. The next month.
What organization? You're.
You need to be like. Perfect. I have a. I was.
Right. Because I can just fine, right? He's got back in. We just became a client. Yeah. We're working with. Yeah, so he's been really good.
Right, right.
We had some R&D credits in the past year, so we're amending the past 2 years. We realized. It's good to be seen. Very nice to meet you.
Okay.
Someone else. No, you're. Okay. Yeah, no, I remember that. No, I know. So actually, so that's I think it would take back to a better place. Somewhere tomorrow. I'll be with Doug tomorrow, wherever you guys want to do. Yeah. Still had a lot of that. Yeah, oh, yes.
I just got it on board with lighting stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, we got our site read. Yeah, and it sometimes leads to less rotation because you bring somebody new, they don't know what jobs. They can rotate them for everything. Yeah. Kind of build.
Can everybody go?
Good job. Expansion. Remote
Yeah, and.
It's been a long time. Shift rating.
Right. Hi, this guy, but. Right now, and also if we don't need that.
Oh,
Some companies will define the very fine print. Accepted and China. I think I'm right. So I would think you probably may have. My little very choice to use last week.
wait for them to announce their teams.
Right.
No, a little bit.
No.
Somebody tried, but we started with audio. Oh, you're right. I was thinking. Yeah, he was there with me. One of my favorites.
I mean, I'd rather. All right. You know, I realize you're worried about financials.
Everybody's chatting. Everybody take a seat. Sorry.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, and sorry. Margaret, you can introduce yourself. Oh, okay. And you should each have a survey. Oh, sorry. There should be a survey at your station or seat, whatever you want to call it. If anybody doesn't have one, please let me know. We'd really appreciate your feedback. Gosh, it's snowing. I know, I know.
All right. So my name is Margaret Mastriani, and I will be focusing today on financial risk management and foreign exchange in particular. So I just want to start with the quick thank you to William Vaughan for giving me the opportunity to present and talk about FX, and also thank you to everybody who's participating for taking the time. So I know some folks in the audience, some of you I have not had the pleasure of meeting yet, so I will start with a quick introduction. So like I said, my name is Margaret Mastriani. If you ever receive an email from me, you're going to see a different name. So I'm originally from Poland. So my name is gonna show up as Małgorzata.Mastriani. I married an Italian Canadian from Windsor. That's the Italian last name. So I warn everybody, it's not spam when you see a funky name, hitting your inbox. I have been with Fifth Third FX Desk for 18 years now, about 22 years in foreign exchange total. And what's kind of fun or cool is I actually sit in Toledo. So you're never going to find an FX trader in Toledo. I suspect that one day when I'm gone, we probably won't have one. So when I started at Fifth Third, I started in Southfield. So outside of Detroit, I have an office in Detroit as well. And we obviously have a large trading desk in Cincinnati. This is where the headquarters are located. We have a large group in Chicago and Charlotte. We have some folks in LA, Cleveland. My boss actually sits in Nashville. So we're kind of scattered all over the place. Now, as far as coverage goes, I am responsible for the state of Michigan, Northwest Ohio, when it comes to corporations up to $500 million in revenue size. And then I also cover large corporate automotive vertical, transportation vertical, and also foreign-owned names in the large corporate space as well. So foreign exchange operates under the umbrella of financial risk management, which basically encompasses interest rates, commodities, and FX. So just as an FYI, if you do have commodity exposure, we have folks who sit in Charlotte who would be happy to assist in that space. Now, obviously, if we knew where the markets are going to be, whether it's foreign currency rates or commodity prices or interest rates, even equities, probably we would not be sitting here. Some of you would be probably sitting on some island drinking margaritas right now, or maybe getting ready for a ski season, depending on what your interests are. But obviously, we don't have a crystal ball, right? So it's really important that if you own a company, that you do focus on financial risk identification, because that's going to be key to achieving business success, right? I don't have to tell you what challenges the companies are facing right now. You hear it, whether it's supply chain, whether it's labor shortages, right? A lot of companies' profit margins are getting squeezed, and they're looking for ideas, ways to increase their profitability. So what we're going to try to do is, again, cover the FX piece and give you some ideas on how you can reduce your cost and how you can mitigate that foreign exchange risk. Oops. So we're going to start with the risk management process. We will talk about, I would say, the most common misconception around US dollar imports. We'll talk about FX basics, market update, just so you know what's happening, types of exposures, why it is important to hedge, FX hedging solutions, and some real life scenarios. The risk management process. Well, first of all, if you want to manage your risk, you have to identify what types of exposures you have, right? And this is going to be driven by maybe geographic location of your company. You might own a company which has subsidiaries overseas, right? This type of company most likely is going to have an exposure. You might be a company which has no international exposure whatsoever, but maybe you own a fleet of trucks and you have diesel exposure, right? And again, I don't have to tell you what's happened to commodity prices post-COVID and post, the start of the war in Ukraine. Obviously, huge volatility. So again, if you have a fleet of trucks, maybe you have operations that utilize natural gas and you have natural gas exposure, you would have commodity risk. Depending on your capital structure, right? Depending on your cash flow, these types of risks are going to be different. Again, there are some organizations that have borrowing needs. There are some that don't. But if you have loans out there, and you know what's happening to the interest rate environment. Some folks were sitting out there thinking, hey, the Fed is never going to increase interest rates, or it's not going to happen anytime soon. They didn't protect that exposure, right? Interest rates have gone up. Now they're servicing debt at much higher levels than they might have been able to lock in if they would have hedged. So bottom line, first you have to identify the risk. Number two, you have to quantify the risk. So basically, you need to figure out what is going to be the financial impact of whether it's natural gas prices going up, right? How is it going to impact your operations? Maybe you bought an equipment from Europe, right? You thought, well, euro is trading at 1 on day when your procurement team is looking at buying this equipment, and all of a sudden 6 months later you have to make a payment and The question is, where is that euro going to be, right? What if euro moves from 1 to, let's say, 120, right? You might end up paying for it a lot more. So we'll go through a quick sensitivity analysis for the FX piece, just so you can kind of get an idea of how you can gauge what that risk is. So number 3 is define risk management policy. Obviously, now you know what type of risk you're facing. You quantify that risk. You have to figure out how you're going to manage it. So in case of foreign exchange, and again, it depends on the company that I work with. Obviously, I've worked with larger corporations. These types of organizations have treasury departments, right? They might have, a group of people that solely focuses on that interest rate or FX or commodity risk management. But many cases, companies just don't have the luxury of dedicating 3 to 4 people to watching the market, right? In most cases, smaller organizations are not going to have these types of resources. So what you need to do is basically have somebody in charge, somebody who's going to monitor that exposure and who's going to implement that policy. So what would this policy look like? So in some cases, I have large automotive companies which have massive, operations overseas. They might have subsidiaries that provide projections, right? Forecasts. Sometimes these forecasts are reliable and sometimes not so much. So there is no black and white that you have to do things in a certain way. The policy has to work for the company. So if the projections from that sub that are coming in from overseas are not reliable, are you going to hedge 100% of that exposure right away? Well, no, because historically it might have been, a crapshoot. They told you we're going to have XYZ exposure and maybe it turned out to be 50% of that, right? So in this case, the company might just say, listen, on a monthly basis, we're just going to layer in additional forward trades, right? We're just going to hedge a little bit at a time as we have more clarity and confidence level higher around the forecasting, then we can hedge more. You might have a company that might say, you know what, we have subsidiaries overseas and we will allow these subsidiaries to book foreign currency transactions. We really don't care about the risk if it's up to $500,000 per transaction, right? So they'll say, hey, the subsidiaries, you guys can book the trades. We really don't care. If it's anything bigger, then you need to come to us and we're going to handle it. So again, depending on the size of the company, depending on the structure, their risk appetite, their goals, that they will define that risk management policy. Maybe they utilize forward contracts. Maybe they do some forward contracts. And in some cases, they hedge the risk via option trades, right? So once we define the risk management policy, we will manage the risk. So whatever has been said in the policy, meaning, hey, we meet on a quarterly basis, we take a look at what's happening, right? We need to hedge more. You implement the policy. So we do have sample FX policies. So if somebody's looking for one, we can share it. And then the last step here is assess risk management process. Obviously, you're going to have to take a look at your FX risk management process. Is it working or is it not? Maybe I only hedged 50%. Maybe I should have hedged 75. Or maybe I hedged 75 and I should have really done 50, right? So it's important to continually review that risk management process or policy to see if we need to tweak anything. So now we're going to talk about what I see as probably the largest, the biggest, the most common FX misconception. So when we talk to clients and we talk about FX risk, a lot of times, obviously clients know if they have foreign currency payments, they have foreign exchange exposure, right? But if they have imports, which are in US dollars, a lot of times they say, you know what, I have no risk because I am importing in US dollars. Now, what happens is when this company here in the US is sending a payment in US dollars to, let's say, a supplier in China, obviously somebody's converting US dollars into that local currency, which happens to be in China, Chinese yuan, right? So somebody is converting the currency. Now, this supplier, when the dollar strengthens and they get more of their currency, local currency units per one US dollar that they receive, they're not going to complain. They're not going to change the terms. They're not going to adjust the pricing, correct? Why would they? Now they're getting paid more in the local currency. But if the dollar weakens, what happens? Well, your pricing will go up because now they're getting less. So even if the company is importing product in US dollars, they do have FX risk because, like I said, as the market moves, that supplier will change the pricing accordingly. And a lot of times when you pay in US dollars, you pay for that convenience. So it's more costly. I'm not saying every single time based on my experience, I would say 90% of the time it's more cost effective to pay in the supplier's local currency. Sometimes it's not. They might be looking for a natural hedge. Maybe they have payables in US dollars, so they're looking for receivables. But in most cases, it is more affordable to send payments in the supplier's local currency. So now this is just an example of a local company which basically was buying equipment from Canada. So one of our relationship managers popped into my office and basically said, listen, company XYZ is about to send a payment to Canada. I'm not sure if there's anything you should talk to them about, just giving you a heads up. So we ended up talking to the company just to see if they had the ability to pay in Canadian dollars, if they had a quote in both currencies, right? This equipment was coming from Canada. So the customer told us, yeah, we actually have a quote in both, but it looked good in US dollars. So we didn't even look at the Canadian dollar option. So they got quoted 1.3 million Canadian and the US dollar quote was 1,000,078. So I'm going to have somebody do some math. I'm going to put you guys to work. Let's figure out the exchange rate. So divide 1.3 million by that 178. Anybody's got a calculator, a phone that they can use? No?
Bob.
I'm going to have somebody do the math. Come on.
Yeah,
let's
come on,
see.
Bob, do it.
Somebody's got to figure out the exchange rate. So
Oh,
let's
good.
divide 1,315,822 by that 1,078 and change. And we'll, I'm sorry?
122.
122, correct. Okay, so this supplier, this Canadian company is saying, I am giving you 122 Canadian dollars for one US dollar, right? At the time, Canadian dollar was trading at 120, 129. So if you're buying Canadian, do you want to get 1.22 Canadian or would you rather pay or get 129? Well, obviously you want to get more, right? So by paying in Canadian dollars instead of that 1,078,000 and change, this company saved about 58,000. So that just tells you that it's important when you are importing product. I'm not saying that every single time it's going to be cheaper to pay in that local supplier's local currency, but it's always a good idea to get a dual quote. And we'll go through another example here of another local company, which was doing something similar, but importing equipment from Europe, larger equipment. But so again, if you think you have no risk importing in US dollars, think again. You do have that risk. And number two, it might be cheaper if you paid in the supplier's local currency. Obviously, you have to work with the right financial institution, right? You have to be set up to hedge that risk because the last thing I would advise a company to do is accept foreign currency pricing and not be able to hedge that. But if you work with a financial institution which does have an FX desk, if you have the ability to hedge that risk, I'd recommend checking. So this is one of the examples of how you can reduce your cost if you're importing product and you're doing it in US dollars. So if you want to figure out if you have foreign exchange risk, these are some questions that you can ask yourself, right? So obviously, if you're looking at, or even, William Vaughan folks, when you're looking at your client's financials and you see gains or losses, FX related gains or losses, obviously, that company has FX risk, right? They have to be doing something in foreign currencies and you might be able to help them mitigate that risk. If you're a company that's importing in US dollars, you have foreign exchange risk. If you're importing or exporting in foreign currencies, you have foreign exchange risk. You might be a company with subsidiaries overseas, or maybe you're a subsidiary of a foreign company, right? Maybe there is an intercompany loan and that loan is in euros or pounds. You have foreign exchange risk. If you're considering expanding outside of the United States and you're looking at an acquisition, you will have that FX risk as well. So there's some examples of questions that you can, take a look at and see, do I have FX risk? Or maybe does my client have an FX risk? And the last question, are you impacted by higher input costs and margin compression? Again, if any of your clients have commodity type exposure, we can help them in that space as well. So FX basics, we're going to talk about what moves the market and a quick market update, so you kind of have an idea of what's happening out there. So does anybody know how big the FX market is? It's massive. So it's kind of funny because I was updating the slide the other day, and last time I had a slide in there. The daily trading volume in FX, it was about $5.5 trillion. We're now at 7.5, and this is based on information from the Bank of International Settlements. So it's massive. The FX market is basically, a market where currencies are sold and bought, and there are quite a few market participants. It could be commercial banks like Fifth Third. It could be central bank, investment bank, obviously corporations. There's going to be individuals, some folks who are in the market because they're doing it for speculative reasons, and some companies obviously do it, and they should be doing it because it's impacting their business and financial performance. As far as what products are out there, so think spot transactions. It's a fancy term for a client sending a wire transfer. So if you need to send a payment in euros, the traders or our FX desk would call it a spot transaction. You're sending it on day one. We deliver typically two business days later, depending on the currency. Other products, there's forward contracts, which allow companies to hedge their exposure. There's option trades, there's swaps, and we'll review these products a little bit later. So now, what do you think moves the market? Today, everybody, I can tell you whether it was equity traders, FX, everybody was watching for that one number coming out. Pardon me?
Inflation.
Perfect. Yes, exactly. Inflation. So economic data does impact the market. And like I said, it doesn't matter if it's commodities or if it's FX or equity, we do watch it. And the reason being is, well, if inflation continues to remain stubbornly high, what is the Fed going to do, right? The Fed is going to continue increasing interest rates. Well, that is good for the local currency. Think about it from the investor's perspective. If you are thinking about investing, where do you want to be? A low interest rate environment or a higher interest rate environment? Well, it's pretty much an obvious, right? You want to be where the interest rate environment is a little bit higher. Well, you might want to go to Argentina if you want to. Not picking out on Argentina, but you can make a lot of money, but there's capital market restrictions. Inflation is super high. So would you want to put your money to work there? Well, if you're risk adverse, probably not, right? So higher interest rate environment is good for the dollar. So the reason why the dollar strengthened as much as it did was because the Fed has been pretty aggressive in increasing interest rates. Well, today the producer price index came out softer than expected. So at 8.8% year over year, expectation was 8.3. Last week, we had the CPI number that came out at 7.7, expectation was 7.9. So again, how is the market interpreting it? That the Fed maybe will not hike as aggressively, maybe. Well, we're already at 4%, right? The market is already baking in another 50 basis point hike at the next FOMC meeting in December. But again, a lot of future Fed decisions hinge on where inflation is going to be. So this is the first set of numbers. We're going to have another one before the next FOMC meeting. Is inflation going to continue going down? If it doesn't and they continue hiking rates, well, the dollar will remain strong. Today, the dollar will actually, last week when the CPI came out, the dollar sold off. It was kind of interesting to see because I had one client who bought euros at 99.50. And literally 30 minutes later, when the CPI print came out, euro was trading at 102 and got close to 103. So it tells you that there's so many different factors. We're going to talk about the other ones as well. There's so many different factors that influence the currency market that there's no way in heck that anybody's going to know really where the currency is going to be 3 months from now or 6 months from now. And we all can guess, and we can all, based on certain assumptions, tell you that I think it's going to be where it's going to be. But all these forecasts that come out, and our clients, of course, always ask for forecasts because they kind of want to know what the banks are thinking. But these forecasts are just educated guesses. So a month ago, we were talking about the dollar being super strong, right? Japanese yen trading at a 34-year low and euro hitting 20-year low and pound hitting an all-time low. And everybody was thinking, hey, you know what? The dollar is going to remain strong for a while because inflation is super high and it's sticky. It hasn't gone down yet. And all of a sudden the CPI comes out and the market is interpreting it as, hey, things are starting to cool off in the inflation space. So the Fed is not going to be as aggressive and the dollar sells off. So geopolitical news. So if you think about geopolitical news, one of the examples, Brexit, right? 2016, who would have guessed that UK is going to decide to leave the EU? Honestly, the market was pricing that they are staying in. Before the decision was announced, the pound was trading at $1.47. When the announcement came out, and it was pretty darn close, right? It wasn't a massive majority that wanted out. It dropped to like $1.32. So think about it. From $1.47 to $1.32. So that's, geopolitical news for you. The most recent example, when did pound hit an all-time low? At the end of September, when Liz Truss, the new prime minister, decided to basically announce massive spending package, right? Which is kind of counterintuitive because she was the leader of the Tory party, which is conservatives, right? When do conservatives ever go on a spending spree? Well, she decided to take a different approach and the market didn't appreciate it. So borrowing costs skyrocketed and pound dropped to 103 and change. Think about it. It's never happened. Pound at 103. I mean, it was at $1.37 earlier this year. Now think about a company that sold product to the UK and they thought they were getting $1.37 per £1 pound. And all of a sudden, oopsie, we're at 103. Unless you have massive profit margin, what company can sustain these kind of swings, right? So it just illustrates how important it is to pay attention to this. And I can tell you before 2008, before the financial crisis, I talked to some clients and, in major currency space, meaning like Canadian dollar or euro or pound, the currency volatility was there, but it wasn't anything close to this. So clients sometimes would say, yeah, you know what, Margaret, I'm not going to hedge because it's never happened before. These ranges that we've seen, it's been fine. And then all of a sudden 2008 comes along and all of a sudden the company's like, whoa, it's never happened before. Just because it never happened doesn't mean that it's not going to happen again, right? So again, geopolitical news impacts the market. Today, I was just reading, I'm from Poland, right? Obviously, my family is back in Europe. So 2 people got killed close to the border with Ukraine because there were some, stray Russian rockets that went across the border. Well, Poland is a part of NATO. Well, that gets kind of, scary. Exactly. So the market sold off a little bit. Nothing major as of yet. So there hasn't been much of a reaction, a little bit, but it can get hairy really quickly, right? And again, who would have thought ever about pandemic like COVID? It's never happened before. Commodity prices, we've never seen anything like this. When did we ever see commodity prices or oil drop to negative 30-some bucks? Can you imagine? You were paying somebody to take oil off your hands. It never happened before. So again, it's just one of the factors that does impact the market. So economic news, we talked about it. technical analysis. Again, there's certain levels that the traders always watch. It's support and resistance levels. Once it breaches, it either goes higher or lower. But again, it's technical analysis that we pay attention to. Expectations, rumors, rumors going around that China is going to loosen their COVID policy. And they loosened a little bit, but it wasn't anything big. Everybody thought after their 20th Congress, after Xi, gets appointed for his next term, that he's going to loosen things up. Well, it really hasn't happened to an extent that one would hope. But every time the rumor comes out, the markets rally. Hey, China's going to open up. Things are going to be great. Well, they will eventually. It's just, when is it going to happen? So do rumors impact the market? Yes, they do. I didn't put it on, but does the weather impact the foreign currency space? There's some currencies that are tied to commodities. So think oil prices. If you have a major hurricane going through, refineries got hit, oil prices go up. Canadian dollar is going to strengthen, and so will Mexican peso. So things like weather can impact the markets. It's kind of cool because we get to pretty much pay attention to everything and watch the crazy volatility, which is fun for us, but for clients who are on the wrong side of the market, not so good. So that's why it's so important to manage that risk and pay attention to that. So this is an example of how the currencies are quoted. So this is more of an FX 101. There's some currencies that are quoted in direct terms, some are indirect. There are 4 currencies that are quoted in American or direct terms, and it's euro, pound, Aussie, and Kiwi, or Australian dollar and New Zealand dollar. That means that the base currency is euro, pound, Australian dollar, and New Zealand dollar. How many US dollars are you getting per €1, or how many US dollars you're paying per €1? All the other currencies are quoted in indirect or European terms, meaning the base currency is US dollar. So $1 US equals how many Canadian dollars? 132. $1 US equals how many Mexican pesos? 19 and change. So again, this is just the way it's quoted. There's an industry norm that we go with. And again, just shows you this was these were the rates from yesterday. So again, back to the volatility, right? I included some charts here and also a sensitivity analysis. So let's assume again that we have a company that's buying equipment from Europe. They got quoted 10 million euros. And at the time, euro was trading at 103.39, right? So if 6 months later, when they have to make that payment in euros, euro is trading 103.39, well, that's what they expected. That would be great. But we don't know what's going to happen 6 months down the road. What if the currency moves 5% higher, right? All of a sudden, it's trading 108 and change. Now you're talking $516,000 loss. So your procurement team was so excited. Hey, we got a great deal, right? Euro was trading 103. This was a great deal. Now all of a sudden you're paying $516,000 more. Is it that great of a deal anymore? Maybe it still is, but maybe it's not. So a lot of times what happens is when we work with companies, whether it's a sales team or a procurement team that maybe doesn't communicate with the finance folks as well. And then all of a sudden they bought the equipment, everybody forgot about it. And then 6 months later, euro's at 118. And all of a sudden this equipment is going to cost them $1.5 million more. That's not a good position to be in. Obviously the currency can, or the market can go the other way and you can realize some gains, but bottom line, listen, nobody knows where the market is going to be. And if you're not hedging that risk, it's basically like going to a casino. You're basically gambling because you don't know which way it's going to go. And we tell clients, because sometimes when we talk about hedging, clients think that we're making a bet. Do you think, well, I think euro is going to go higher. So yeah, I want to hedge. You're not hedging because you think the currency is going one way or the other. You're hedging because you want to protect your profit margin. You want to lock in that rate. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So again, this is just, again, examples of the volatility that we have seen with the euro, with a pound. Again, euro this year, when we started out, it was trading, well, the high was around 114. The low was 95 cents and change. So quite a bit of a swing. For pound, it was massive. We started out at probably $1.37, 39. We got down to 103 and change. Since then, it has recovered, but still huge volatility. Even between September. So in September of this year, pound hit 103 and change, and now we're trading at 118. Can you imagine? In 2 months. So the volatility that we have seen in the major basket currencies is reminiscent of what we have historically seen with emerging markets. Who would have thought the pound is going to go from 103 or 130 some to 103? It's incredible. It's like I said, for us, it's kind of cool to watch, but not so cool if you're caught on the wrong side of the market. Some examples of some other currencies. Chinese yuan, we have quite a few clients who import product from Asia. So looking at what yuan has done, traded, the low was around 630 and change. We got up to 735. So it has weakened. The dollar this year has performed really well. And it's been, again, a function of the Fed increasing interest rates, high inflation, also geopolitics. US dollar has always served as a safe haven. So when there is fear in the markets, folks tend to run to the safety of the dollar. So again, there's a little bit of a, correlation, I should say a little bit. There is a correlation between oil prices and Mexican peso. Canadian dollar historically acted the same way. So this just tells you how the currencies have performed against the US dollar this year. So when I checked earlier today, the DXY index, which is the dollar strength index, was at 106, 107, somewhere around there. And that DXY index, I'm sure you've heard about it. It's kind of skewed to the euro. There are 6 currencies that impact that DXY. So euro, Japanese yen, pound sterling, Canadian dollar, Swedish kroner, and Swiss franc. So as these currencies depreciate in value, this DXY index goes up, meaning the dollar is getting stronger. So the highest we've seen this year was around 114, and that was towards the end of September. This is when, again, less trust, this whole UK fiasco was unraveling. So Canadian dollar, year to date, or from the beginning of the year to today, moved about 3%. And you can see British pound, 12%, Japanese yen, 17% decline from the beginning of this year. Now, this is spot returns on or biggest gainers and losers when it comes to emerging markets. You can see the Brazilian currency has done quite well. Mexican peso has done quite well too. The low this year was around 21.50. The low was, or the high was around 19.20 and change. Obviously, if you look at Argentine peso, the one that I was picking on before, 36% decline year to date. Turkish lira, 29% decline. So again, this is one of the countries where if you look at their inflation CPI was at over 70%. Can you imagine? We are complaining about inflation of 7.7%. How would you like 70%? I think I would be spending money left and right. So yeah, their producer price index at 150%. And what Turkey has been doing is basically completely unorthodox and makes no sense, but they have been cutting interest rates instead of increasing interest rates, right? So that is not helping the local currency, and every central banker that Turkey had that was thinking about increasing interest rates, their president Erdogan fired every single one. So now they only stick with the ones that cut interest rates. But anyway, just tells you Turkish lira, what it has done year to date, almost 30% decline. So now moving on to exposure types, why we should hedge the risk, and some FX hedging solutions. And how are we doing on time? You like the close? Okay. So when you look at exposure types, there's transaction risk, translation, economic slash strategic risk. So when it comes to transaction risk, it's tied to current period cash flows, basically converting from foreign currency to US dollars, receivables, payables. So think again, a company that is buying equipment from Europe, they need to send this payment today. They ordered it 6 months ago. 6 months ago, euro was trading at 114. And now they're paying 103, so they're pretty happy if they didn't hedge, but if it went the other way, probably not so much. So that's transaction risk. Translation risk is going to be tied to periodic revaluation of foreign assets and liabilities. And then strategic economic exposure. Think about it from the exporter's perspective too, right? So as the dollar gets stronger, your products outside of the United States becomes more expensive. So you might lose potentially your competitive edge because the dollar is getting stronger. Nothing you can do about it, but it's still an FX risk or economic risk out there. So why do we manage risk? You know what? I'm going to skip to the next page and I'm going to give you an example. Again, it's an actual example of a company, local company, which decided to, okay, so historically they used a distributor in Canada. So this distributor was selling their product. One day they decided that, you know what, we are ready to take this next step. We are going to start selling product to Canada on our own. No more distributors. We're not selling in US dollars. We're selling in Canadian dollars now. So they started, or they made this decision in 2014. So when they started selling product to Canada, Canadian dollar was trading at $1.10. This is when oil prices were way above $100 a barrel. All of a sudden, there's a shell revolution. Oil prices dropped big time. Canadian dollar tanks. So they were looking at the summertime, and it was 2014, probably July, August. They would be paying me $1.10 Canadian per one US that they're getting. All of a sudden, now Canadian dollar weakens to 125 at the beginning of 2015. And a few months later was actually trading even worse in the 130s. So they didn't even think about hedging that risk. All of a sudden they're sitting on these Canadian dollar receivables, right? And you're not paying me $1.10 Canadian. Now you're paying me $1.25. So Canadian 110 and 1 million, Canadian 1.1 million and 110 is equivalent of 1 million US dollars. Now, if you take that 1.1 million Canadian at the rate of $1.25, you're only getting $880,000. They just lost $120,000. So I know there's some companies out there, and I've had the opportunity to work with some, but they're extremely unusual. One that I worked with had a 75% profit margin. If you have a 75% profit margin, if this happens, well, you're not going to like it, but it's going to be okay. But if your profit margin is 10%, well, it can really make or break the company, right? So sometimes the question comes up, are there, like, when do you hedge? Are there amounts that you shouldn't be hedging? And I can tell you there's no black and white here. It depends on the company. So if I'm working with Lear, which has $20 billion in revenue and $2 billion in FX exposure, if they have $20 million unhedged, you think it's going to hurt the company? Probably not, right? Because in the grand scheme of things, they have $2 billion of exposure. What's 20 million bucks? But if your company is a company of 30 million in revenue size and 20 million comes from overseas and you're billing your clients in foreign currencies, it can create a solvency issue. I mean, it can make or break the company. So there is no right or wrong. Do I hedge $100,000 or 200? If you have a small company, maybe you should, right? This other company I might be working with might be laughing. 100 grand, it's nothing. Or $2 million. I don't even pay attention. It's too small. But if it's a smaller company, you might have to hedge that risk. Otherwise, it's going to get ugly. So why do we manage the risk? All the things that we have talked about, right? Nobody really knows. We don't know where the market is going to go. You want to protect that profit margin. So if you're selling product overseas and you're doing it in foreign currencies, you want to lock in that US dollar equivalent. You don't want to sit there and hope that the currency rate goes the right way for you. So it allows you, by hedging allows you to focus on your primary business, right? It allows you to develop growth and sales strategy given known costs. It allows you to lock in your margins. It creates more predictable prices. So it's basically the right thing for the company to do. So now real quick, we are going to talk about FX products. So spot transactions. So when your client is, when your company is sending a payment in foreign currency, today you need to send a payment to Mexico because you might have a subsidiary and folks down there are waiting for their payroll payment. That's a spot transaction. In most cases, the delivery date on a spot transaction is 2 business days after the day you book a trade, right? So if today is Wednesday, what's today? Tuesday? No, whatever. So let's say today is the 10th. 2 business days later, 12 is when we deliver the funds to the beneficiary. For Canadian dollar, it's the next day. Now, can we deliver sooner? Is it possible to deliver the funds sooner? Yes, absolutely. So you just have to keep in mind there is a time difference, right? So if I'm sending a payment to Europe, I can send that payment for same day value, meaning beneficiary gets the funds the same day, but I have to do it early in the morning because of 6-hour time difference. And we have to get the funds to Europe before their banks close. Now, if you are working with a bank, the banks are going to have several channels they can use to process your foreign currency payments. So if you're a corporation, I would stay clear of doing business with a local branch because the local branches can send wires, but they're really focusing on individuals, right? Not corporations. So the rates that are offered at the branch level are retail type rates. So they're great if you're sending 500 euros. It doesn't matter if the spread is 300 basis points. It's going to be peanuts, right? But if you're sending 100,000, 200,000 euros, shouldn't be going through the branch because you're going to pay a wire fee and you're going to get a retail type rate. So it's important that if you do have foreign currency transactions, you get set up with an FX desk. So in some cases, corporations might be doing business with a local community bank, and they're great. But when it comes to foreign exchange services, they won't have it. So if they want to help their clients, they have to outsource it. So a local community bank might work with a bank like Fifth Third or maybe B of A or somebody else to process these transactions. So if you do business with a local community bank and have foreign exchange needs, it would be a good idea to have a dialogue with another institution to see if they can at least help you on the FX front, or maybe commodity hedging, whatever it might be. So, so again, this is a spot transaction. Now, indicative pricing, this is for forwards. Oh, so let's assume that you are a company which is buying equipment from Europe. Historically, you might have had no exposure whatsoever, right? You're a strictly domestic company. You don't import, you don't export, but now you're growing your business and you found a piece of equipment in Europe which you need to expand your operations. So you're looking at buying equipment and it's 10 million euros, right? What do? You can lock in an exchange rate today for that future payment that you need to make. So a lot of times there's going to be progress payments involved, right? You might have to make a payment 3 months down the road, maybe 10% up front, then another payment 3 months later. We can, via forward contracts, lock in an exchange rate today for that future purchase of euros that you might need to make. And I know in some cases clients don't know. Listen, Margaret, I don't know if it's going to happen on January the 15th or if it's going to happen, in February. Can I lock in an exchange rate for a window of time? Absolutely. You can lock in an exchange rate for a window of time, and on day one, you know exactly what you're going to pay in US dollar terms for this 10 million euro piece of equipment. So based on what I see, I can tell you that even in my large corporate space, probably 90% of clients utilize forward contracts. It's a really vanilla product. Lock in the exchange rate today, no matter what the market does down the road, right? So if you lock in an exchange rate, I'm going to give you an example here. Euro, when you lock in a forward rate and you're going 18, or let's say a year out, if the spot market is trading right now, if you were to send a wire, you're paying 103.40. A year out, you're paying 105 and change. So this is not, sometimes clients ask a question. So where's this forward rate coming from? When you send a wire right now, you get a spot market rate. Forward rate is not the same as the spot market rate. And it's not where we banks think the currency is going to be. It's basically spot market rate adjusted by forward points or interest rate differentials. So since interest rate environment in Europe is much lower than ours, they have been hiking rates, but not as aggressively as what we have done here in the US. When you lock in a rate a year out, your rate is significantly higher than a spot market rate. But when you lock in that rate, if euro at that time trades at 114, it doesn't matter. You locked in that 105.99 rate. If euro is trading at par or at 99 cents, it doesn't matter. So again, with hedging, you're not doing it because you're trying to make money on it. You're not doing it because you're speculating. And we, as banks, are prohibited from allowing companies to book transactions that are not driven by their business needs. So if somebody comes up and tells me, Margaret, you know what? I think euro is going to rally a year from now. I want to buy some euros. If it's not for business purposes, I am prohibited from booking the trade. So anyway, if you're locking in that exchange rate, right, you know what you're getting. You take this volatility and uncertainty out of the question, out of the picture, and you can move on. You can focus on your primary business and not worry about what the market is going to do. So as an example, pound sterling, right? Right now, let's say it's trading $1.17. A year out, it's 118.21. So you're paying about 100 basis points going a year out. There's an example for Canadian. Mexican peso is great, and most of my clients are buyers of Mexican pesos. Obviously, I work with a lot of companies in the automotive space. They have operations in Mexico. They send payments in Mexican pesos. So the farther you go, their interest rate environment is significantly higher than ours. The Banxico, which is their central bank, has been aggressive in hiking rates. Forward points are at a premium. And if you are trading right now at 19.40 on the spot, a year out, you're getting over 20 Mexican pesos to $1. So it's kind of nice because, again, most of my clients are in a good position. The farther they go, the better the rate gets. Now, FX swaps. So sometimes what happens is this piece of equipment, right? It was supposed to come 6 months down the road, but things got delayed. We had an exchange rate locked in basically to deliver the euros to the supplier a year from now, or I'm sorry, six months down the road, things got delayed. What do? Well, forward contract constitutes an obligation. So you promised you're going to take delivery of the euros, and we as the bank promise that we're going to deliver the euros to whoever you choose us to deliver the euros to at that fixed, predetermined agreed rate. So if something happens and things get delayed, we can swap it. We can push it out. At the end of the day, the P&L impact to the company is really the swap points. So if something gets delayed, if something happens, you booked a contract, we can push it out. Now, another solution is in option trade. Think about it as if you were buying an insurance policy, right? If you own a house, if you have a car, you probably have an insurance policy. Doesn't matter if you burn down your house or if you crash your car, you're paying the premium, right? And if you don't crash your car, you don't get the premium back. You're just paying it. So this is the same concept. You're basically buying protection. So the option gives you the right, but not an obligation to deal. So if you're buying this piece of equipment, right, 10 million euros, you can say, you know what, my guys were, at the time when they looked to purchase this equipment, they were looking at the rate of 1-to-1. You know what? I can probably stomach 102 exchange rate. So I will buy protection at 102. But if euro drops to 95 cents, then I pick up that 10 million euros at 95 cents. So I have some large corporate clients who have option premium set for the year, and they kind of dip into it as they hedge their exposure. In most cases, though, most clients don't go with a plain vanilla option because, again, it carries a premium. If you can lock in an exchange rate with a forward where you don't have to pay a premium, most clients tend to go with that forward trade instead. Again, there are structures, option structures that we can put together for clients, which are zero cost. So zero cost collars again, you're gonna sacrifice something to gain something. So let's say if you can lock in an exchange rate for euro at 104.50 going a year out, we can put you on a collar where you might be paying maybe 105, not 104, worst case scenario, but if euro drops to, 101, you can pick it up at 101, right? So we can get creative with option structures, but like I said, plain vanilla, the ones that carry a premium outside of my large corporate clients, a handful. Most middle market type companies don't get into option trades. And how much time do we have? Are we out of time?
Close, getting close.
Okay. So real quick, so these are some real life scenarios. Okay, client planning on purchasing equipment. So this is one that I'm working with right now. They're buying equipment from Germany, and funny enough, last summer we had a conversation with this company because they have Indian rupee, not Indian rupee, they have Indian imports, right? So we talked to the company. These imports are pretty small, so exposure was minimal. There wasn't a whole lot to do with this Indian import situation, but a month later, they decided to buy a piece of equipment from Europe. So since we had a discussion with a company, advised them, listen, if you're buying something, just ask for a dual quote, because this way we can determine if you're, potentially leaving money on the table by paying in US dollars. So this company did ask for the quote in euros and US dollars. They got a quote from the supplier at 106. So when you're buying euros, I am charging you $106. Now, euro was trading at 1-to-1. So guess what? Obviously, it was cheaper for them to go with that euro quote. So by accepting euro pricing on that 4 million euro equipment, this company saved about $240,000 on 4 million euros. Think about it. So this is just another illustration of why it's so important to ask for that quote in the local currency. In some cases, listen, if you're going to get something from Zimbabwe, there's going to be some currencies that we might not be able to hedge, right? There might be capital market restrictions, but the usual suspects, whether it's, imports out of Europe, China, Canada, even some countries where there's capital market restrictions, we can still help through non-deliverable forward. So it works a little bit different than a standard forward, but we can still help. So again, think about it, 4 million euros, $240,000 this client pocketed because they made the right decision and asked for that dual quote. Client with existing operations making regular FX payments. So there's a company that I'm working with. They are actually in healthcare space. So they make medical equipment. They have operations in China. They have operations in Mexico. They're actually, because of that zero COVID policy, they're considering shifting most of their manufacturing to Mexico. So they're going to be nearshoring. I think Mexico and peso is being supported in one of the reasons is because a lot of companies are looking at shifting business from China. So anyway, the company has Chinese exposure, Chinese yuan and Mexican peso. What they do is they lock in the exchange rate when the budget time comes for the next year. So they hedge their exposure a year out. They know exactly what that payroll in Chinese yuan and in Mexican pesos is going to be in US dollar terms. So what they do is basically monthly forwards. So they lock in a window of time, an exchange rate for a window of time for a specific amount of Mexican pesos and Chinese yuan. When the month comes, they draw down on these contracts. So when you lock in an exchange rate for a window of time for that specific amount of foreign currency, you can draw down multiple times. So you can have 100 drawdowns if you want, as long as you take delivery of the whole amount. Client importing products and paying in US dollars. You already have that example. Okay, client who has receivables and payables in the same currency. What I advise clients to do is the best way to manage risk is to create a situation where you don't have it. So if you can create a natural hedge, if you have receivables and payables in the same currency, then it makes sense to open an account in that local currency. So if you have receivables and payables in Canadian dollars, you open a Canadian dollar account, receivables are coming in, you're dispersing out of that account, you're basically mitigating that foreign exchange risk. So that would be something I would advise to do if you have receivables and payables in the same currency. Client with FX needs who works with a smaller community bank, something that I kind of touched on. So Another example of a client who banks with a local community bank. One of your employees last year brought up the company name, introduced me to the company. It turned out that by doing FX piece with us, this company is saving about $50,000 to $60,000 because when they were working with a small community bank, the rates were not great. They also bank with Scotia Bank, and their rates were not very competitive either. So we were able to step in and offer significant savings. And the beauty of working with us on the FX pieces, we can support clients who have absolutely no relationship with a bank. So if the company is happy with their community bank, and obviously there are a lot of great community banks around, they do a great job too. If they are just, looking for an FX type solution, or maybe they have commodity exposure, which that community bank cannot help them mitigate, we can help. So again, they don't have to shift the entire relationship. We can just step in and handle the FX piece and everybody's happy. So that's an example of a client who works with a smaller community bank. Large money center banks, again, they're great. They have the capabilities, but a lot of times what happens is unless the company knows what they're doing, that large bank, whether it's B of A, JP Morgan, whatever it might be, basically direct them to the online platform. If you know what you're doing, great. But if your transaction sizes are smaller than $1 million a pop, don't bother calling me, right? So larger banks are going to look for significant flow. So if you're P&G, if you're Ford, GM, large company with huge flow, you're going to get their attention. If you're small, nobody's going to hold your hand. Nobody's going to help you figure out what you need to do. So this is why I feel that, regional banks are going to do a much better job. And like I said, the beauty of me being in Toledo is local companies. I can meet with anybody who's here. I come out and visit clients all the time. We want to make sure we understand everybody's business and we can come up with solutions that make sense for that company. So again, if there's anybody out there who would like to talk and pick our brain or just, look for ideas, we're here to support them. Let me see, client with Chinese imports, pricing. Okay, so there's another company, which is actually, they have operations in Monroe, but headquartered out of Ann Arbor. So the company makes backyard type products. And they have contracts with Chinese suppliers. So this client, again, when we had these discussions, they acquired another company. So they really didn't know if they had exposure, if they didn't have it, but we started having discussions. It turned out that they have contracts with this Chinese supplier. And the contract, the way it works is, okay, if Chinese yuan is at 625, when you guys send us a wire and we have to convert it to yuan, then nobody pays anything. If yuan is trading above 625, that's great. We kind of split the difference. But if yuan becomes more expensive and we're getting sub 625, then we split that difference too, right? So any losses, everybody's going to have to eat it. So looking at it this way, this company is completely exposed, right? Because as the currency rates fluctuate this year, if that benchmark rate was 625, they're doing all right because yuan has depreciated against the dollar. We got to, 735. So that's great. Now on their financials, they're showing gains because that difference between 625 and whether it's, 705 today, whatever it might have been, they're splitting it. So it's all fine and dandy. But when this Asian supplier all of a sudden changes the benchmark to, let's say, an average for this year, and they pick 680, and all of a sudden yuan is trading sub 680, they're going to be showing losses. And that's what happened a year, 2 years ago. So we're having discussions around hedging that risk and basically asking that supplier, listen, give us pricing in yuan. We will just hedge it on our end. And that's it. We're not, we don't want to have these swings, gains and losses. When there's gains, it's okay. But when there's losses, nobody wants to see it. So Lear was another one, again, because of all this massive volatility. They had similar contracts with some of their suppliers. And they basically told me, listen, we're revisiting everything. So some of these contracts were, again, they were structured similar to the other company. they want to just stick with foreign currency pricing. They have the ability to hedge it. So they don't want to see this crazy volatility. Let's see here. Client sourcing from Brazil, paying in US dollars with pricing based on an average rate. So that's another automotive company. Again, they had a contract with a Brazilian supplier who basically said, listen, we're going to take an average rate, US dollar Brazil rate for, let's say, a quarter, and this is what you guys are going to end up paying us in, in our local currency. Well, this automotive client of mine, they want to have certainty. I want to know how much Brazilian real I'm going to get. Is it going to be 480 or is it going to be 520? I don't want this average thing going on. So there is a product that you can utilize. It's basically average rate options. So again, when it comes to, mitigating the risk and finding solutions, there's so many different ways to do it. There's so many different products out there. So again, depending on what the company is looking for, their budget rate, their goals, risk appetite, we can structure it however they need to. I think I'm out of time, right? Right, yeah, oh yeah, sorry. So we had some other scenarios, but I'm out of time. Any questions? Oh, I see a question coming over here.
So with respect to the forward pricing and exchange risk mitigation, if a client did forward pricing, does the vendor that they're procuring from, so scenario purchasing from China, you did 6 months forward pricing, does the vendor get a different amount than the agreed upon contract, or are they also mitigating their risk?
They have no risk because that supplier is getting their local currency, right? So if they baked in a margin into XYZ pricing in yuan, they're getting exactly that amount. So when you send wires, obviously sometimes, there's bank fees along the way. Like we're talking $15 or $20. And if that supplier is sensitive, we can suppress the charges along the way. So it's just a function of formatting the wire. But bottom line, that supplier has no risk because now they're paying and they're getting paid in their local currency. So sometimes our clients are able to negotiate even better pricing if they ask for that local currency. Because that supplier, you don't know what kind of relationship they have with their bank. Are they working with a bank that offers, FX services? If they do, does this company's credit profile allow for them to hedge, right? Because that's another piece to the equation. What kind of pricing they're getting? So like I said, in many cases, that supplier will be very happy if they get paid in their local currency because they don't have to manage that FX risk. They get paid in local currency. They get paid, get paid the amount that they were looking for, and everybody's happy. So yeah, by paying in US dollars, a lot of times you're paying a premium because it's convenience, right? So great question. Yes.
Well, you said earlier that if you have receivables and payables in that foreign currency, you can open an account.
Yes.
Now, do you open the account here in the US or in the other country?
Great question. So when it comes to Fifth Third, if you open an account in Canada, we actually have presence in Canada, but we utilize RBC. So these clients can actually go to like an RBC branch, make deposits. When it comes to other foreign currency accounts that we offer, it's through Citibank. So it's actually housed out of London. So these are not the types of accounts that you would use to go to a brick and mortar type location. They're pretty much electronic in nature. So if it's euro, pound, you can receive wires into that account. You can disperse out of it. If it's a Canadian dollar account, you can cut checks out of it as well. So Canadian is a little bit different because we actually have presence in Canada.
Actually, like the UK. Now, the question is, if you don't have a lot of activity, what are the fees? Is it
Great question. That would be a
convenient or
question.
the fees are going to exceed the
Does it-
exchange
Does it
rate?
make sense? Okay, so another question, great question. We have folks within our global treasury management team that can provide pricing. So if you're looking for specific pricing information, we can shoot it over to you. And they will have information on, the cost, the monthly maintenance cost, wire fees, whatever it might be. They can analyze the activity. So there is a client who's sending payments. They can tell us, hey, we're sending 30 wires on a monthly basis. We receive 20 wires in. we can analyze it and provide pricing information. A great question. If you're interested, I can certainly look into it and put you in contact with our global treasury team. Thank you. Great question. Any other questions? Nobody wants to know where the euro is going to be? Well, thank you. I know I took a lot of your time, so I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Any questions? Feel free to reach out. I did bring my business card, so if you're interested, I can drop one off, and please don't hesitate to call. I'm always happy to help.
Everyone joining us today and our speakers. If you did need the CPE and you signed in, please make sure you sign out or you will not get the credit. And there is some drinks and appetizers, I think, coming in right now. So please take some food with you.
Oh. You guys cannot leave until you finish all the food.
Yeah.
We're gonna lock the doors.
Yeah.
Hi, Christian.
Hey. Here's my card. Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'd love
Hey,
to.
Doug.
Anytime.
Ever have any questions?
Mostly we're.
Okay, well, that's great.
When did?
Hello.
Two years. A couple years. Great. I'm.
Good. I'm sure everybody knows the head during FX risk. Oh, yeah. You wanna take them home?
Thanks.
Hey, great to meet you.
Here you speak and.
Sounds great. Sounds good. Yeah, email's great.
Hey, Ruben, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Nice to meet you too. I'm gonna leave you my card. Christian? Just thank you. Yeah, think about your existing clients, right?
Great. Hi, thank you.
Yes,
So you know, you can help them save some money. You know,
Level.
Do you need to take home? Oh my gosh, you got like.
He's, in fact, he's.
We've got
still
Joe back.
really- Oh, is that right?
He's back with us, yep.
Yes, thank you.
I have a hard time. Where's David?
Oh, thank you. I'm Margaret. You already know.
For 2 days.
Oh my God. Hey, Dave.
And then sometimes in the summer. 2 days.
He's explained it to me. I know.
So I might see him Monday and then.
Kind of thing, so, generators that
Great.
service the hospital, you know, there's a power
Oh,
outage,
gotcha.
things like that. And the thing he misses about that is the hand on it.
Okay.
Because after he had to be in the county and Cyrus. And so he was out on.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Okay, very
He
good.
really misses that.
Yeah.
He misses.
Tell him I said I.
Yes.
Please do.
Awesome.
That's what he did his internship.
Great to meet you.
They hired him.
You were saying like, oh, yeah. You know.
Before we started. That team did a great.
Oh,
job.
now.
The only time they called it was
And now that his wife actually makes phone call.
Yeah. he's like-
And
You're on. No, you're.
so, you know.
How are you doing? Get some comfort.
He doesn't like bears.
That's right. Yeah.
Experience with it. And so they.
That's great.
They're gonna take us to terminate it.
No, because I.
Funny, but, you know.
I did too.
Finished.
We don't.
Liked it enough that we referred it to.
I give you that card.
I kept asking.
Hey, Sam. Great to meet you. I think I've also asked any questions. So,
Like my daughter.
There you go.
Gotcha.
It's a great field right now.
The best thing
Yes.
With the trade.
You know.
Like a sublet?
Yeah, yeah.
Or no, when your payments are coming in?
That's what I feel like. Was tired with that. 55,
Yeah. Just gotta keep
That's better, that's good.
Yeah.
I have a feel like.
That's how.
Probably gonna be the most complex, right? So if you open an account, there's gonna be monthly.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. You know, like. Picture up the Port Clinton.
Yeah.
Stick out.
If they're willing to do it, hey, that's. And if it goes like past a month, then they
And they flew out.
have to, like, banks have to reconcile the books, right? And you can't be sitting on an outstanding.
No,
Oh,
no,
okay.
I mean, it's like, well, it's a few days per hour. The month would be like, let's go to the airline.
okay.
Yeah,
Right.
we've done this, but you know, it goes back. We have
So she comes here on her week off. Okay.
That's gonna be cheaper than. I can send you.
Nice to meet you. How are you?
There's no cost to it.
Okay.
If it's not broken, I'm trying to fix it. This is gonna be more expensive. I don't know what it is, but it's gonna cost you.
That's why. Business advisors. That's why.
Yeah, it's not broken, to try to fix it.
Okay.
I was gonna say, great for a young person to still have. Eyes and stuff, yeah.
Okay, now, I'm gonna pay somebody and they pay,
Yes.
and, let's rate goes down.
Okay, great.
Better.
Great.
No, but what I'm saying, do I have?
But what are your kids up to?
That's what's the money? Or
Yeah,
do
great.
I
Managing stuff.
money
Oh,
and
watch it, lock it in. No, it's a contract. It's an obligation. You are locking it in and you want optionality.
Well,
Well, then an option.
so
Then you're paying for
right now.
I know, that's what I said.
Oh, just for you guys. You need to buy pounds.
But I mean, but
payments.
Yeah, it's like, I get something. Okay, so I paid it something, and then at the end of the year, you know, like the rate.
Now,
Then I use time. They offered, I do that to them.
Well, so when you
Yeah,
want
we
money,
Yeah.
locking
I
in
don't know,
for
I can ask.
specific
Yeah, I asked them.
currency,
I will.
it's specific ratio. So if you say I'm taking delivery of pounds, in the month of.
It's like, all right. I don't know. We've had a couple of.
Okay.
Doesn't matter what.
Well, and if anyone's industry, we have clients that we have to, so let us know.
Pay 117, and if it rallies, the pound rallies to 120,
I know.
you are paying 120. I mean,
But I mean, if you lock it in like span of 1 year,
Oh.
you know, it's like, we don't.
Like,
if you're locked in for a year.
maybe not the best referral.
I know.
Oh,
But I'll ask. I don't think
Like,
Then
okay,
you
I
buy
want-
it spot, then you
I
buy
looked
it
at
spot.
that, and
Last Friday.
when I do that,
Now, turn 50-hour job. Wednesday, like,
Yeah,
like,
sure.
by the end of January, you know, it's okay. And then we had another one.
Yeah.
Another one.
Oh, yeah, if you're gonna use, yeah, then you
Yeah.
can buy
Yeah.
extra.
Once a week with.
It's not like, okay, if I want this amount, then I have to use it first and then.
No, you
why
don't, you
another
don't,
money?
you Well, then that
Thanks for
is
visiting.
something that contract.
I know.
It's just like.
It's nice to meet you.
In this market, you do whatever you want. We don't care. You can buy another 20 million in addition to whatever you locked in, as long as you're gonna deliver.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
15%.
We gotta figure out your lease.
There's a lot of flexibility.
Yeah, I know.
The solutions are-
I haven't started mine yet.
You can get so.
I know there was.
I'm hoping this.
Yeah,
That's what it is. This woman has a lot of information for sure.
We have brought it there.
You can help, but yeah, some clients get.
I mean, I feel like.
Publicly traded companies.
That's what I.
Privately owned, they just- which is great. So, you know, there's no. It's much easier if you're a private. Yeah, that's fun. Well, keep me posted. You got my card, so any questions, you can let me know. But yeah, if you're interested, just out of curiosity.
Not doing anything.
We can only shoot it over. But they're gonna ask, like, how many mics you see, how many mics for now, right? Because they need to kind of gauge.
Thank you. Absolutely. Yes, yes, yes.
Yes, you just. What contracts we have, and it varies from 1 year to the other.
So you importing oil, right? Yes.
For the law. In case, sometimes have to build those equipment. And they buy from suppliers about money.
It's not a bad
Currency fluctuation.
Okay.
So now the policy is like, okay, you want to buy from us, you pay us in US dollars.
Yeah,
Doesn't matter. And
They can pay in pounds, you just have to ask them. I can help you. See if I, like, once you get burned, obviously you accept US dollars, you're good, right? There's no risk there, but if you're losing sales, if you're missing out on sales because you don't want to do it in currency, then it becomes harder to get. It's the way to hedge it. If you do it the right way, you don't lose any money.
And if we have these contracts like every year, then we would do hedge a lot.
Okay.
You know, just spontaneously, you know, it just happens. 1 year we might have a lot of business, the second year.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know.
Well, listen, if anything comes up, I'm local, so don't hesitate
So
to.
where are you at? What?
So I have an office downtown. I have an office in Detroit. I do cover quite a bit, so I'll be in West Michigan the next few days. And then
That's $5.
December. Yeah, but I live in Harrisburg. Okay. My cell phone is on my card. I said, you can track me down wherever I am.
I have another question for you. So you mentioned WVC. So I used to have an account.
Okay.
And with COVID, I didn't go to Canada, so I didn't get any money. So after COVID, I went to check on it, and you know, the branch said, "Oh, we can't find your name, we can't find your bank account, we can't find anything." So I don't know what they did with it.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, I see. This is why people are really successful and working with clients of these Canadian accounts, because customer service, when they us on these Canadian accounts, we have contacts on RBC that we call to get things done. If you bank directly with RBC, customer service.
Oh, but.
Canada.
Oh, the bank system, Canada is horrible.
There's no customer.
We don't have Jason.
They just, you know, it's, they operate a little bit differently. They have a handful of banks here, everybody's. Customer service really needs to be above and beyond. You know, they just don't.
I think they closed the company just a check.
They or.
I didn't know.
And Mike told them.
Reset.
Because I had gone through puddles.
I know.
I know, I didn't write something. They had a restriction.
Oh, yeah. So now everybody can travel.
We went to this girl skiing in February.
It's a tough story. And my,
Extra better.
She used to live in Vaughan.
Sold a house for a five lakh.
Well, it's great meeting you.
Because she's on ribbons. I can use it for. And so with, that time. So my parents went there and they wanted to go back home. And I want to go and say bye to them and my little one with me.
Yeah.
And the borders, yeah.
Our neighbors are vaccinated.
They didn't say anything, you know?
Quarantine.
Or maybe.
So I go there, we went just for like an hour and went back, you know, came back. The Canadian government was coming every day, making sure that he's quarantined. And I said, I'm
We left
back,
the country.
I'm back.
I know.
And the thing is,
Isn't that crazy?
and they go the next day, like, is Daniel quarantined?
No.
So how does he? She said, we are in the States. And
It was crazy. I know, like one of my, so my husband is one out of four.
Yeah.
So his three brothers go to Canada and one of them is married to a Dutch lady. She opted not to get vaccinated. So yeah, she could like. She didn't go anywhere. It's like she was in contact with anybody. Literally like come to her house to make sure that she was actually under quarantine.
Yeah.
It was like, it's not the same. Another lesson, this is a, you know, dictatorship.
I know.
Yeah. So his brother said, hey, Mike, the whole time they were proud to be Canadian.
Oh, ask.
COVID, all these restrictions, they're like, oh, you're lucky to be in the US. We were if we could.
I know my friends on they just got crazy. It's like-
Yeah. But at least now it's okay. So
At
our
one
family.
point, you're gonna get the ring, which is fine.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I need one. Then I asked, you wanna talk to him? Let's see what he has.
Wow, what's everybody?
I know
Yeah,
people
you have a
there.
drink?
What do you have? That's why. You want
I
to drink wine?
I will go with something white.
And they had them since February.
Yeah.
It was January.
Oh, wow.
And then he just never entertained it.
Yeah.
And then he liked it there and so.
Well, when things change, it doesn't like that.
I'm sure. I'm like. Yeah. Because, oh yeah, this is great. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You got a little boy, a little space. How are you? Good, how are you?
Yeah, there you go.
On there next?
We were just talking about warmer, maybe.
Yes, you might want, yes. Yes. Oops, yeah, well, let me try this. I like sweets.
Yeah, right.
I can't have bread. I don't know what it is, if it's phosphates or what. It's like, it kills my, not my stomach. It's like, my stomach just.
I know. They try and.
Yeah, I know. It's like yesterday we got an email, one of them, like, we're like 34. I'm like, you're just starting. I'm like, oh, yeah.
Yes.
It's been 30, served everybody well. Cheers.
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 Oh.
We have another event.
Oh. Oh. Hey,
Don't worry about them.
That's right. That's right.
Gotta keep going.
Yeah, I know.
I'll tell you what, I hate bedtime. So I
That's
think
one thing. Here for a while.
Okay. It's always good, okay.
It's very rare that you have
People would have known that you guys would find. And when I before we did, I thought.
like.
I know we were having.
Oh, well, I stopped. Good see you.
You're free to take.
Yeah, we'll figure out.
Oh, that doesn't affect my life.
Sounds good.
Yeah, why don't you start thanking it?
I tried to email during the day.
Next time.
I know, we gotta.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, which is the.
Week's not over yet.
Yeah.
It's only Tuesday.
Uh-huh.
We got 2 days. That's it. We got 48 hours.
Yeah.
Just do it really.
Oh,
well.
yeah.
That's right.
Sometimes.
I'll do it tonight.
And the machine.
Yeah.
I can get really early tomorrow.
Yeah. Like I said, a lot of times companies that, the ones that have foreign exchange exposure, they're already managing it, they know what they're doing. Then they buy equipment, they think about getting a quote in the local currency. A company that's never done anything, it's like, well, I get $40, that's great, looks okay. They don't know if it would have been even cheaper. If they would have.
We did. Probably
So I'm telling you, it's like in the span of just like 2 months, I had a number of companies like 240 grand, that's not.
That's not the disease.
Exactly. Exactly. It's like, you know what? Why give it to a supplier? A lot of times they use it as a compass. Not the hedging fees. It's like, we're gonna charge you US dollars. I'm not gonna lose money. Means I have to manage that risk.
No, I don't want to switch.
So, a lot of times, like I said, there's been instances when I checked and the price was good. So if it's not broken, yeah, we're gonna try to fix something. It's not broken. It's an exercise, easy exercise. All you do is you ask for a quote on the local currency in US dollars. I will check and tell you if I can give you rates that are, you know, beneficial. If it's beneficial, then, you know, pay another currency of the supplier. It's not.
That's why.
Then pay US dollars. So
I walk back.
it's an easy exercise to go through.
Walk up front to where our tables were, we had 2 tables.
Every And then everybody's, where are you gonna sit? I'm like, don't worry, I'll find a seat. Which event? Oh.
This topic is kind of, yeah, not necessarily any of my clients.
I'm like,
Yeah,
yeah.
but.
Well, it's
It's like, oh, but wait about.
signature and then water for.
Oh, yeah. So how long have you been?
There was more, every single bank.
Our Bowling Green office was just bought last year, but I had been there 32 years, so now I've been.
Oh my gosh, wow. So what company were you guys at the time?
Riddell Smith was.
Okay, gotcha.
We're right down from the Fifth Third Bank.
Okay.
BG.
Okay.
He's a great kid. Right down
Yeah,
the
he
street.
is.
Oh, wow.
From where
Yeah.
PNC.
Yeah. He did
So,
a
but yeah.
presentation here for us
I
last.
started there because I heard her.
Yeah, we did. That's- I thought we had a chance.
Nice. Okay.
We're gonna try that.
Okay.
You start do a little bit of key too.
Okay. Okay. Needed the flexibility.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
They were really. Because
So they really leases
they couldn't
anymore now?
afford to pay somebody.
That's right.
Both sides.
Okay.
And then, you know, it's.
Taxes are.
Yeah.
Better to buy.
Now at the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that at a time you,
Still on the
yeah,
balance
that
sheet?
flexibility.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's awesome.
Take care of tax deduction.
So it's been good.
It's great.
Yeah.
No,
It goes fast. It's 18 years will be, you know.
I think.
Longer.
Oh, yeah.
Turn process.
Yeah.
is like-
It seems like I just started not too long ago. I'm like 18 years.
No, right.
Were you two at EY at the same time?
I think so, yeah.
Pretty close.
Or what,
You were both OI,
Yeah.
or were you? I don't know.
because you hired me and then left before I even started to go to OI.
No, he was OI, I think.
He was
Where do
at
you-
EY, him and Mike hired me and then he left like before I even started. You hired me like 6 months or
Oh,
6
that's
months
right.
or a year
Hired
in
you-
advance and then like.
I heard he was
You
OI.
were gone before I even got there.
I went to OI in 04. So,
Cause I still like a year after, yeah.
so I went to OI like.
And that's when I
March of-
started
March of
actually
04.
EY. So probably, yeah, you moved to OI and then I came to EY.
I mean, you remember Erica Chambers, right?
Yeah,
So Erica, Sam and I all went to Crenshaw, Pennsylvania.
exciting place.
We
No,
think,
we had
we
fun.
make Sam drive us around like we did our chauffeurs in the back of the car.
One of the OI garden spots, Crenshaw.
Yeah, we go to
Get
this
bored there,
meeting.
you right down the road to Brockwell.
We go to this meeting, Erica's like, hi, I'm Erica, and they're like, America? Now, like, even to the station, she was on my wedding gift from, I was
Call her
calling her America.
Is it Crenshaw or Brockway had the golf course?
Brockway.
Brockway had the golf.
That was long.
Yeah, help yourself.
So are you guys working next week or off or?
I'm off next week. Well, I think the office is open, what, usually 2 days, like that
Monday,
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Yes, I'm taking vacation time too. I'm using Wednesday and Friday.
Where are you going? Anywhere?
Oh, no, we're hosting, so getting ready for hosting and then cleaning after hosting.
Right.
Yeah.
No, you know what you don't,
Exciting week.
Yes.
if you leave, you don't have to host.
Yeah.
And the other thing, if you just offer to take your family to Belmont, you don't have to host either, like.
That's true.
Like an hour and a half over.
Yeah, we're gonna go from several ways. Love you guys.
Ready from the shop, like, oh, yeah, oh, yeah. But yeah, it's gonna be done. Yep, a lot of people taking
Oh,
vacation
yeah.
time, a lot of businesses are closed on Fridays anyway. And on
Yeah.
Wednesday, people scoot out at like midday, so.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be dead. I figure I'm not gonna miss much. but,
Yeah,
You won't.
no, I don't think so.
What day is the football game here? Is it Wednesday? Like,
Yeah, I think it's Wednesday.
they're like, does Jimmy want to play? I'm like, absolutely not. Like, he does not.
Turkey bowl.
Oh, you have a
Terrible.
football games?
Yeah, I'm not sure
I
what
heard
time.
the time.
it is.
I don't know if they
Yeah,
decided the time.
But they did it last year, doing it this year. and
Yeah.
so,
We're just like, yeah, that big yard.
Right out here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Guess we're gonna have an actual.
You know, Haley can come.
Yeah.
Do you want to come play?
Football?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty big. Only blocking.
There's fun. We want to talk to your
It's
son.
flag, yeah, it's flag.
I'm trying to hit her up about her son pretty hard.
You did that a couple years.
He's working on his.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Oh, no. Yeah,
Yes,
that's around for
You're
you.
done.
No question.
I
No
know.
question.
Because I'm just like, just get this last exam, just pass the last one. So
Okay.
it's first week of December he's scheduled, so.
Is he working anywhere or no?
Yeah, he's working on a local farm, yeah.
So we can talk in the second week after his stuff.
Oh, yeah, listen, he's using, he has 3 weeks vacation, so if he fails the exam, he's got 3 weeks to study.
Those are fun.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm like, by the end of the year, that's it.
Get the thing knocked out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's so happy when he passes the last one. I'll be nice. Oh, we'll be talking when he's done.
But they shouldn't complain. It's easier now than our.
Oh, yeah.
There's no
listen,
question.
You have to take it on board.
Or, yeah.
Everything you did.
I don't know how you do it.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
And in the spring.
I mean, Dave, you go there in the morning and even the evening and then the
Rain
next day.
spot.
Oh, my gosh. That was brutal.
Did you pass all 4 parts at once?
No, I passed 2 and then I
That's all you
did,
need to do, right?
Yeah.
The two
As
done.
long as you
Yeah.
get like 50%.
and then I did 1 and 1.
Yeah, yeah.
That's how I
Did you
did it.
pass all the first
I
time?
literally got a 79, 75, 75, and 71.
Oh,
I got 3 of
wow.
them. That's pretty good. Oh, I was a terrible test taker, like.
I
I
did, I did
worked
3 and
my ass off to get those.
My first boss was governmental, not for profit, governmental. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, bingo.
I tried it the first time without much studying, didn't go well. No, he's for right. Get past me.
The only one that I remember the 3.
No, I would never go back.
Brian Peters was his name, remember? He put his that on his license plate. BY guy.
Oh, I remember.
And he was mad because he only got like the second highest score on the CPA.
Oh, geez.
And I'm like, in my mind, you realize, Brian, nobody's ever gonna ask your scores, right?
You obviously overstudied.
Yeah, yes. That's right. That's what they always told us at BG, that, you know, if you get too high a score, you say way too much.
Yeah, if you're into that stratosphere, it was way too much.
Yeah.
And you couldn't even use a calculator,
Right.
except for the tax part, you know? Yeah,
Serious?
yeah.
I was in the
Oh,
middle of the
yeah.
transition, like the last time I took it, was the first time you could use a calculator.
And
And I actually think without the calculator it was easier because if you got a really weird number, you knew it was wrong.
Backing into the answer.
Yeah, exactly.
Those calculators were that tiny, they provide them to you, and they have no functions. I mean, it's just a plus,
Yeah.
plus and minus and equals.
Multiplied by.
Yeah.
There's a four-banger calculator. Very basic. And then the baseballs, they used to have it at the rec center, so spring training.
Mhm.
During the spring session, the manhunt would be having batting practice while you're taking the CPA exam. So the balls would be hitting the metal rope. Then there was always that group, as soon as you were 1 hour in, you could leave. As soon as they announced the 1 hour, you'd have people just get up. and
Just
leave.
get up and go. Well, I'm gonna date myself, but I had to go to the state fairgrounds
Oh, yeah.
before they did it locally, you know? Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So you had to drive your plans to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so serious. I had a guy, I actually went to BG with him and he was the class clown. So we walk in to take the exam and he's sitting, I think like right beside me. And the lady starts passing out and he's like, is this the one with the answers? You know how she was not having it. He's probably lucky he didn't get kicked out. You're trying to make me lighten the mood and she was very serious.
She probably stood by him the entire time.
Right.
Yeah.
He had his own personal
Keep an eye
proctor.
on him.
You're right.
His own personal test.
Well, I'm gonna scoot. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you.
Take some food home with you? Oh, I mean, we don't have enough.
Like a
You guys, like,
Yeah, well, not the tray. I have to go back to.
I say, it looks like.
Yeah.
That's out. It's like, come on.
You're fine, you're fine. I'm fine.
Everyone through
Right.
And it'll disappear too.
Yeah, yeah.
That's like our, we put any food out, it's.
Yeah.
Julie, what's that? Is that?
A mint brownie?
Mhm.
I thought it was mint. I don't think there's
I
mint in it.
might have one.
Have one.
There you go.
And this?
I don't know.
Somebody wants meatballs.
I know.
Those are lamb meatballs.
Oh, we had
Oh,
lamb?
meatballs last
Wait,
time.
wait, wait.
We're back.
There's a pint over there, Sam.
Oh, wow.
I wanna try those then.
I wonder what
Great
the
stuff.
sauce is. Last week it was like a blue cheese. This looks more dill or
You
something.
wanna take one? Got some saran wrap even, I think.
You probably have to go.
Only thing I ate today was this sandwich. I was so hungry. I mean, I was busy. I could not even eat lunch or anything.
Yeah, that looks really yummy.
I mean, do you guys have forks or anything?
Absolutely. Did we get, yeah,
I'll get back in.
Yeah. I should go.
With
Let's get products here.
Oh,
mint?
Wow, this is, I'm sure, good.
That does look good.
Look at my kids on vacation. You gotta run. That's great.
There you go.
Thank you. Yeah.
We can take it on the party.
right, right. Yeah, we should. Want to take some food home?
But I'm going to the
Oh.
thing at UT.
Oh, okay, well.
So there'll be
Oh,
food
yeah, you're gonna whole night.
Yeah, so I had some veggie. I had healthy stuff. I had a little trail mix. I did eat a couple chips, but other than that, I tried to eat healthy stuff because,
There you go.
you know, that's all.
I got check on dinner to go home, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had like to go. Here. We think like William Bond to go in there because I have powdered sugar all over my shirt. from eating
That's what
a
happened.
brownie.
That's what I just did too. It was like, gotta fresh off the powdered sugar.
Wanna wear it proudly.
Food is
When you
good.
get caught.
Where do you wear black and you get powdered sugar?
Pork and knife, or what's it called? Pork and
Like a
knife
Greek place?
Fork and knife, I think.
and pan
Here.
from.
I think they do a
Which one
variety.
is it?
Oh,
Pork and what?
Joel, here's dinner box.
Pork
Here,
and
you wanna
knife,
take
I
them home with
believe.
you? Yeah.
Good?
Is it
I'm
good?
gonna take one for Jimmy.
Yeah.
This is,
I think it's
he
got-
said, he's
Yeah,
raving about
good.
this.
Love it. Is it good?
Don't mind my powdered sugar all over my.
That's
Are you
lamb,
good? Okay.
You like it?
Very good. Yeah, I love lamb.
I love lamb.
Where is that in Perrysburg? I've never been.
I don't even know. I've heard of it, but I.
They're moving to downtown. I'm not sure where they're located, but we use them we used to use Michael's Catering in
Yep.
downtown and I love them. And
Are
then,
they just a caterer then?
yeah, and then
Oh,
soon,
it's just catering.
yeah, and then, well, they do like weddings. Yeah, they do weddings with it, but they're just catering.
Ah.
They started your container? Would you like a container for some?
I am
Well, if you're
good.
raving about that.
I would feel bad. Leave it with a doggy bag.
Is this, is this an extra? Here you go.
Thanks. You can pick up these trays and take them right to the tailgate. There you go.
That's really good.
You weren't going to the tailgate, remember?
Maybe I
Yeah,
should
no.
take.
Move down.
No, he's going. No, I'm gonna deliver the food.
I'll take three. I wanna get some yogurt.
He's raving about
Maybe
that.
Oh, wow. if
I'll
it
take
now,
four.
like,
There
should
you go.
have-
You probably should.
Jeez. They can give them a sandwich.
Well.
Is that bribery for bedtime?
Anybody heard that? Tell him you got bedtime tonight. So-
Yeah, it's it's
I
really
know.
good. Such like
That
it.
work?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, bedtime last night. And
No.
bedtime tomorrow night. No, actually, you won't.
I haven't stopped that recording.
Go ahead, more.
That's been like.
My box?
You know what? I'll take one for one,
Let me find the box. Jessica, where were the boxes at?
That, we don't have any more.
oh, wow, okay. That's a sign that I need to pass.